Romantic Tales. Chapter 112. Emo Shuyao was startled and a trace of undetectable sorrow flashed past his eyes. After a long time he said in a low voice, "The Ding King's household no longer has anyone who can fight. In less than 5 years, the Ding King's household's 100 years of fame will be annihilated." The common people were always forgetful. Even if the Ding King's household had once protected the Dechu state for hundreds of years, even if the Dechu state was like a god of war in their eyes, once the war broke out again and the Ding King's household was powerless, they would not remember their past glory and would only remember their incompetence. However, the Ding King's household could not blame them because they were not in the wrong. Northern Militant. In the study room after a long silence, Yi Li's voice faintly sounded. Looking at Emo Xiaoyao's expressionless face, she sighed softly. Wasn't it good for everyone to live peacefully in the world? Why did they have to drag the common people into the merciless flames of war for some completely unnecessary reasons? Yi Li felt that she would never be able to understand the thoughts of those in power. Yi Li suddenly felt that this man was very pitiful. He should have been high-spirited and vigorous like his ancestors, pointing out the country and living a carefree life. However, he could only use his youthful appearance to turn the tide when his elder brother suddenly passed away. As early as when he was 18 years old, he had already given up everything he could to protect the Ding King's household's 100 years of fame. After losing his healthy body and handsome appearance, he still had to carefully face the spying and scheming from all sides, as well as the assassination that would come at any time. As intelligent as he was, perhaps he had already seen the future of the Ding King's household. It was just that he was unwilling and could not admit defeat. "Can we retreat?" Yi Li asked. However, the moment the words left her mouth, she was annoyed at her own childishness. Since ancient times, how many of those who were powerful enough to shake their masters were able to retreat unscathed? Emo Shuyao lightly said, "Emo Shuyao can retreat. Where can the 800,000 Mahist army and 50,000 Black Cloud cavalry retreat?" Yi Li was silent. The people of the Emo family, such as the previous regent Emo Lufeng, and even the previous masters of the Emo family, would not be more stupid than her. There weren't many masters in the Ding King's residence. Of course they could just leave. The world was so big, where could they not go? However, the hundreds of thousands of soldiers who were loyal to the Emo family in the Ding Palace would not leave so easily. When the Dechu state was in trouble, it needed them. When the country was at peace, each of them became a thorn in the emperor's side. Once the master of the Ding King's residence left, the best outcome for them would be to be broken up and suppressed. No one dared to imagine an even worse outcome. Sometimes, in the eyes of an emperor, hundreds of thousands of soldiers might not even be comparable to a chess piece in his hand. "If the northern tribes really reignites the flames of war, what do you plan to do?" Yi Li asked. Emo Shuyao looked at her and said calmly, "Lead the troops into battle. Li, I will send you to Yunzhou when the time comes. With Mr. Qingyun here, no one would dare to do anything to you. If it were me, the imperial family would not dare to touch you." Yi Li frowned. She suddenly felt that it was a bit ridiculous. They were originally discussing Emo Jingli's marriage. Why did they suddenly run to this kind of thing? Clearly there wasn't even a shadow of it. But the faint uneasiness in her heart told her that the conversation just now was not her imagination. Even if her brain was damaged, Emo Shuyao would not be damaged with her. Turning her face to ignore Emo Shuyao's words, Yi Li nonchalantly changed the topic. "Li Wang is going to marry an equal consort. Should I make a trip back to the Yi family?" Without needing Yi Li to think, a steward came to report to the Yi family before noon. Old Madam invited Wang Fei to return to the Yi family to discuss something. Returning to the Yi Fu, Yi Li was directly invited into Old Madam Ye's courtyard. The moment she stepped into Rong Hall, she saw Yi Li's red and swollen eyes from crying and Wang Shi's angry screams. Old Madam Yi and Minister Yi were also sitting with a gloomy expression. Yi Li curled her lips and understood what was going on. "Grandmother, father." "Leah." Old Madam Yi saw Yi Li come in and her eyes lit up. She hurriedly beckoned for Yi Li to come forward. Yi Li's mouth twitched. She was silent inside. Old Madam didn't think that she could control the emperor's marriage, right? He was just a princess Ding. Don't talk about Li Wang marrying a princess. Even if he wanted to take a concubine, she couldn't control it. "Leah, you're finally back. Look at your sister. Ing really has a hard life. Yili walked forward and glanced at Yi Ying, who was crying in Wang Shi's arms. She sat down next to old Madame Yi and asked, "Fourth sister, what's wrong?" Old Madame Yi said anxiously, "Ying was married for less than a month and Li Wang is going to marry an equal concubine. Where will our minister's manor's face go? How will your sister live in the future?" Yi Li nodded and said, "Our prince also received the invitation from Li Wang Manor just now. At this time, fourth sister isn't in the manor taking care of matters. Why did she come back?" Wang Shi glared and said angrily, "What did you say? Ying is already like this and you still blame her for coming home? Yi Li, are you still human?" "Old Master, shut up." Old Madame Yi glared at Wang Shi and said angrily, "Li is right. Just now this old woman has been talking to you for a long time. Did you turn a deaf ear to it? Li Wang Manor is now taking care of the marriage. If Ying the princess doesn't come out to take care of it, how will others see it?" Wang Shi said with dissatisfaction, "Li Wang let Ying down and still wants Ying to take care of the marriage for him? Is there any justice in this?" Old Madame Yi sneered and said, "The emperor's words are justice. You were also present on the night of the marriage decree. Why didn't you come out to take a look? Don't come up with those bad ideas beside Ying." Yi Ying's mind was still thinking about the conversation with Mo Xiuyao in the morning. How could she be in the mood to listen to them at this time? She patiently persuaded Yi Ying, but Yi Ying didn't appreciate it. With tears in her eyes, she hugged Wang Shi and cried, "Sob, sob. Father, it's all your fault. Why did you insist on marrying me to Li Wang? If not, how could your daughter be wrong today? This should be her, Ying." Minister Yi patiently growled and glared at Yi Ying with a gloomy face. Yi Ying couldn't help but hide in Wang Shi's arms with a gloomy face that had never been seen before. She sobbed with grievance. Yi Li silently looked down and concealed the fluctuation in her eyes. So it was not Yi Ying's idea to hook up with Mo Jingli in the beginning? Then, what did her father mean by letting one of his daughters hook up with another daughter's fiancé? Well, it's already like this. What's the use of saying this? Minister Yi impatiently waved his hand and looked at Yi Li. "Li, what do you think?" Yi Li suppressed the doubts in her heart, raised her head and said indifferently, "It's difficult to follow the emperor's orders. Besides, it's related to the diplomatic relations between the two countries. I'm afraid there's no room for discussion." Minister Yi frowned and said, "Are we just going to let it go? If it's a lowly one, it's fine. But that's the princess of Xiling Kingdom." Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "It's because she's the princess of Xiling that we don't have to worry, right, father?" Minister Yi pondered for a moment and his brows gradually relaxed. He said, "That's right. Li Wang's future successor can't have the bloodline of the Emperor of Xiling. Besides, the princess of Xiling put on such a show in the palace that day. I'm afraid that Li Wang has some grudges against her. As long as Ying can control the power in the residence, we don't have to worry about a princess who's married for peace." Chapter 113. If fourth sister wants to gain a foothold in the house, I'm afraid you have to start with Xian Zhao, old concubine, Yi Li said softly. "What?" Yi Ying couldn't help but scream. "That old woman has always disliked me, and you want me to flatter her? She has been thinking of ways to torture me." Yi Li frowned and interrupted her. "Xian Zhao, old concubine, is Li Wang's aunt and the Empress Dowager's younger sister. You don't want to flatter her, but there are many people who think so. Moreover, I'm not asking you to flatter her. You just have to let her not find fault with you. It's best if you can make her feel that you are a satisfactory concubine." Xian Zhao, old concubine, had been in the palace for decades. How could it be so easy to flatter her? She was afraid that when the time came she would end up like a dog instead of a tiger. Yi Ying said bitterly, "Since we got married she has been finding fault with me. As long as I do something wrong it's not right. How can I make her satisfied? If she finds fault with you, you just have to endure it. When you have time you should ask grandmother how to be a good wife. You are Zhaoyi's younger sister, the daughter of the minister's manor. You have the title of Di Wangfei. You have far more advantages than Princess Ling Yun, a princess from another country who married into the empire. If you can't do it, then just pack up and go back to the minister's manor. Father and madam don't mind supporting you for a lifetime." Yi Ying suddenly forgot her grievances and distress. Her small face was red with anger. She stared at Yi Li with a pair of watery eyes. She sneered and said sarcastically, "That's right. If you can't endure it, you would have run back to the minister's manor crying. But if you were not married, I would just hang myself with a rope. Yili was too lazy to be angry with her. She calmly put down the teacup in her hand and glanced at her. If you have the time to be angry with me, it's better to go back and do what you should do. Ying still wanted to talk back, but old Madame Yi slapped the table and said, enough. Learn from your third sister. Look at what you have become. Ying was stunned. She couldn't help but cry when she thought of her own situation. She wiped her tears and said, what have I become? Who caused me to be like this? Right now, who knows how many people in the capital are secretly laughing at me? Ooh. How can Prince treat me like this? What did I do wrong? Old Madame Ye's head started to hurt because of her crying. She said irritably, enough, what's the use of crying? You only know how to cry all day long. You're already married. Do you still think that you have your temper when you're at home? Men, send someone to invite Prince Li to bring forth young Miss back. Grandmother. Yili stopped her and said, fourth sister, since you're back, there's no harm in staying a little longer. Prince Li would probably come personally to pick her up. If we send someone to invite Prince Li now, we will be at a disadvantage. Minister Yi looked at Yili with appreciation and said, Mother Li is right. Old Madame Yi pressed her forehead and sighed, I'm going to be confused by her anger. Old Madame Prince Li is here. The steward outside the door reported. Although Old Madame Yi and Minister Ye's faces were still gloomy, Yili could see a trace of joy in their eyes. It seemed that Mo Jingli coming personally to pick up Yi Ying made the two of them very satisfied. After all, their daughter was already married. No matter how angry the Yi family was, it was impossible for them to let Yi Ying move back to the Yi residence and let the Yi family support her for the rest of her life, as Yili said. Not long after Mo Jingli came in. His face was still cold and gloomy as usual. In fact, Yili almost couldn't remember seeing Mo Jingli's face in a good mood. It seemed that he always looked like someone owed him a few hundred taels and didn't want to pay him back. As soon as he entered the door, he saw Yili. Mo Jingli paused for a moment before turning his gaze to Yi Ying. Yi Ying bit the corner of her lips, feeling wronged. She snorted and turned her head to ignore him. Minister Yi and Old Madame Ye's expressions were also indifferent. They didn't have their usual attentiveness and thoughtfulness. Wang Shi's face was even more gloomy. If Old Madame Yi didn't secretly glare at her, she would have questioned him directly. Seeing this, Mo Jingli's eyes darkened. Obviously, he wasn't in a good mood. In fact, regarding this marriage, Mo Jingli felt even more wronged than Yi Ying. It wasn't that he wanted to marry that Princess Lingyun. Why would he marry someone who was defeated by Yi Li? Brother Emperor didn't want that woman, so he didn't even ask and just gave her to him. After returning home, Yi Ying kept making trouble with him. Princess Lingyun, that ungrateful woman, even dared to make a scene in the embassy and refused to marry him. Who did she think he was? Did she think that he would only marry her? After being annoyed by Yi Ying and Princess Lingyun, Mo Jingli directly went to the palace to tell Brother Emperor that he wanted to break off the marriage and not marry Princess Lingyun. However, he was reprimanded and chased out by Brother Emperor. Then he was reprimanded by Mother Empress and Mother Consort. The more he thought about it, the worse Mo Jingli's face became. Minister Yi saw that something was wrong and stopped while he was ahead. He coughed softly and said, Prince is here to take you back. Sit down and talk to Prince. Yi Ying turned around with red eyes and looked at Mo Jingli pitifully. Prince. Her resentful voice made Yili tremble uncontrollably. She watched Mo Jingli walk over and hold Yi Ying in his arms. He whispered, let's go back to the mansion with I. Prince. Her is so sad. Boo. Yi Ying sobbed and fell into Mo Jingli's arms and cried. Mo Jingli held Yi Ying's waist and silently listened to Yi Ying's grievances. Although he didn't say anything, his face obviously improved a lot. Let's go back. Mo Jingli carried Yi Ying horizontally and nodded to Minister Yi and Old Madame Yi. He directly ignored Yili and turned around to walk out. However, Yili was left with a lot of questions. In fact, until now, she still didn't understand whether he really cared about Yi Ying or not and how much he cared about her. Probably, it wasn't easy to guess the thoughts of someone with facial paralysis, even if Mo Jingli was a slightly deformed facial paralysis. Yili leaned on the chair and supported her chin as she thought silently. After declining Old Madame Yi and Minister Ye's invitation to stay, Yili brought people out of the minister's manor. Seeing that it was still early, Yili remembered that since she married into the Ding King's manor, She didn't seem to have gone out alone. Just then she remembered Nurse Sun's various hints. Mo Shuyao's birthday was in a few days. Yili decided to see if there were any suitable gifts. After making up her mind, she brought Qing Wan and Qing Shuang to the busiest street in the capital. Walking along the bustling street, Yili couldn't help but feel a little distressed when she couldn't find anything suitable after browsing through several shops. She didn't know what kind of gift was suitable. Qing Shuang looked at Yili's distressed appearance and boldly asked, "Princess consort, do you want to buy something?" Yili looked at the two curious maidservants with sparkling eyes. She hesitated for a moment before saying, "Nurse Sun said that in a few days, it will be Mo Xiuyao's birthday. I want to find a gift for him." Qing Shuang rolled her eyes at her. "Miss, do you need to run to the streets to find a gift for Prince?" Yili was at a loss. "You mean to give a ready-made gift? Wouldn't it seem insincere?" Moreover, there were a lot of treasures in her room, but other than calligraphy and paintings, most of them were women's jewelry. Did she really have to pick a calligraphy and painting for him? Chapter 114. Qing Wan pursed her lips and snickered. She blinked and whispered, "Prince doesn't lack any treasures. If Princess wants to show sincerity, why don't you make a gift yourself? Even a purse is more valuable than an antique in Prince's eyes." "Purse?" Qing Shuang waved her hand. "How can a purse do? How about Wang Fei make some clothes for Wang Ye?" "Clothes?" Yili looked down at her hands. She didn't seem to touch a needle and thread since she married into the king's mansion. But this seemed to be a good idea. "Princess Ding?" After making up her mind, Yili was ready to turn back to the king's mansion, but she was blocked by a voice from behind. Yili looked back and saw the pair of cousins standing in the crowd. She just wanted to say, "Enemies are bound to meet on a narrow road." "Pizzi Princess." Yili nodded slightly. Lei Tingfeng didn't seem to see Yili's indifferent and alienated look. He walked forward and smiled. "What a coincidence. Princess Ding is shopping alone?" Yili smiled. "Qing Wan, Qing Shuang greets Shitzi and Princess." Did Shitzi Genom of Gojoseon's eyes go out of their sockets? Didn't he see that there were two living people standing beside her? Lei Tingfeng's eyes twitched and he smiled. "I'm going back to West Hill in a few days, so I want to buy something for Ling Yun. I don't know if Princess can help me." Yili looked at the enthusiastic and indifferent siblings with a fake smile and said, "I'm afraid I can't help much." "How can that be? Princess is proficient in both the pen and the sword. She is also the champion of 100 Flowers this year. Her vision must be good." Lei Tingfeng smiled. Yili couldn't refuse anymore. She could only say, "In that case, Shitzi and Princess, please." Princess Lingyun glanced at Yili. Her face was haggard and she looked dispirited. It seemed that ever since the betrothal her life hadn't been too good. She just didn't know what method Lei Tingfeng used to make Princess Lingyun listen to him obediently. The three of them walked on the streets with their attendants. Princess Lingyun was completely absent-minded. Even when walking, she had to be supported by her maidservant from time to time so that she would not bump into the passing crowd. Yili saw that the previously arrogant and domineering young lady had become like a withered bean sprout in just a few days. While Princess Lingyun was being ordered by Lei Tingfeng to try on clothes, Yili asked, "Princess Lingyun doesn't look too good." Lei Tingfeng raised an eyebrow and looked at Yili with interest. He said, "Is Princess Consort sympathizing with Lingyun?" Yili glanced at him. "Shitzi as her cousin doesn't sympathize with her. Is it my turn as an outsider to meddle in other people's business?" Lei Tingfeng smiled unconcernedly and said, "It's nothing. A child is throwing a tantrum and going on a hunger strike." "A child throwing a tantrum and going on a hunger strike?" Yili nodded. "I hope the princess won't collapse on the wedding day." Lei Tingfeng was full of confidence. Or rather, he didn't care at all. He smiled and said, "Princess Consort, don't worry. Our shilling will not allow such a disrespectful thing to happen. On the day of the wedding, Ling Yun will be glowing as a bride." Yili turned her head to look at the decorations in the shop. She didn't have any good feelings towards people like Lei Tingfeng. She didn't believe that Lei Tingfeng didn't know what kind of ending Princess Ling Yun would face if she stayed in the Dechu state to marry Mo Jingli. He just didn't care. A person who could push his cousin to a dead end with a smile and say that he was doing it for her own good. In reality, this kind of person was colder and more heartless than Mo Jingli. Lei Tingfeng saw the alienation in Yi Li's expression. He looked at Yi Li with a smile and said, Princess Ding seems to have something against me? Yi Li glanced coolly at him and said, No, I never have anything against strangers. Stranger? Lei Tingfeng smiled meaningfully. How can it be a stranger? Speaking of which, did Prince Ding and Wang Fei like my wedding gift? Yi Li said, The cloud-grasping sword is of great significance to the Ding Wang Fu. How could they not like it? I've troubled Shitzi. Oh no. Lei Tingfeng shook his head and said with a smile, The cloud-grasping sword is a gift for Wang Fei. Prince Ding and Wang Fei's gift was sent to the Ding Wang Fu the day after the wedding. Did Wang Fei not receive it? Yi Li stilled and her brows furrowed. She stared coldly at Lei Tingfeng and said, Shitzi has good methods. How many people want such a famous painting but Shitzi can easily give it away? Lei Tingfeng smiled and said, I'm a rough person. Famous paintings need to be appreciated by refined scholars, right? Prince Ding and Wang Fei are both very satisfied. Yi Li stared at him. Ho Er smiled faintly. Shitzi has spent so much effort, how can Prince Ding and I not be satisfied? Speaking of which, Han Mingyue's Chu Jing beauty has long disappeared. To be able to see the former #1 beauty of the capital, Yi Li is very fortunate. Interesting. Lei Tingfeng praised and looked at Yi Li with a smile that wasn't a smile. He said, Wang Fei, I don't believe that Wang Fei doesn't know that the woman in the painting is Prince Ding's fiancée. Yi Li looked at him. So, Shitzi gave that painting to make Yi Li feel ashamed? I wouldn't dare. Lei Tingfeng smiled and said, Wang Fei is talented and beautiful. Tingfeng admires you very much. How would I dare to have such thoughts? But Wang Fei should admit that sometimes, what you can't get is the best. Isn't that right? Yi Li raised an eyebrow and said, There are many things you can't get in this world. Shitzi shouldn't have such thoughts. Lei Tingfeng giggled and said, Why shouldn't I? The Shitzi feels that as long as you want something, you should use all means to firmly grasp it. Otherwise, wouldn't it be regretful if someone else took advantage of it? Yi Li lowered her eyes and calmly drank tea. The princess is about to come out. Is Shitzi sure you want to chat with Ben Fei here? Lei Tingfeng stilled and said with a helpless smile, Wang Fei really is a straightforward person. Tingfeng can't. Yi Li raised an eyebrow and looked at him silently. Lei Tingfeng smiled and said, It's not a big matter. Someone wants this one to pass a message to Wang Fei. In addition, I also have a question that I would like to ask the princess. I'm all ears. Someone wants me to tell Wang Fei. Other people's things will always belong to other people. Lei Tingfeng looked at Yi Li and smiled. Yi Li didn't change her expression. This sentence. Does it have anything to do with Shitzi's congratulatory gift? Lei Tingfeng shrugged and said, I don't know. This one is only responsible for passing the message. Also, doesn't Wang Fei want to hear what this one wants to ask? Shitzi, please speak. This one just said, This one admires Wang Fei very much. I don't know. If Wang Fei is interested in traveling to Xiling? Yi Li's eyes darkened. Was she being teased? Or did Lei Tingfeng feel that it was a very satisfying thing to kidnap Prince Ding's wife and elope? After looking at Lei Tingfeng for a long time, Yi Li faintly sighed and said, Shitzi, this consort has the intention of traveling to Xiling, but I'm afraid. What are you afraid of? Lei Tingfeng's eyes were deep and unfathomable. I'm afraid. This consort will die at Shitzi's hands before stepping into Xiling's borders? Yi Li coldly laughed and faintly finished the latter part of her sentence. Lei Tingfeng's expression instantly froze, as if he couldn't think of what expression to put on for a moment. He could only stiffen his face and laugh dryly. What are you saying, Wang Fei? This one is sincerely inviting you. Yi Li stood up and smiled. Since it's like this, if there is a chance in the future, this consort will definitely go with our prince to Xiling to visit Shitzi. Today I won't disturb Shitzi and princess's time together. Goodbye. Chapter 115. Ignoring the expression of Lei Tingfeng sitting there, Yi Li stood and walked out. In the inner hall, Lei Tingfeng, who had been left behind, stroked his chin as he looked thoughtfully at the bead curtain swaying because someone had left. The smile on his face was even more arrogant and ambitious than before. An interesting woman, no wonder Mo Xiuyao would marry her. In the inner hall, Lei Tingfeng, who had been left behind, stroked his chin as he looked thoughtfully at the bead curtain swaying because someone had left. The smile on his face was even more arrogant and ambitious than before. An interesting woman, no wonder Imo Xiuyao would marry her. Princess Lingyun walked out from inside, still wearing the same clothes as when she had gone in. She stood by the door and looked resentfully at Lei Tingfeng. Lei Tingfeng raised an eyebrow and lowered his eyes to hide the disdain in them as he said, "Lingyun, don't think about it. Imperial brother is doing this for your own good. Compared to that Li Wangfei who doesn't have a brain, this Princess Ding is very hard to deal with. Even if you enter Princess Ding, you will not be able to beat her. Haven't you suffered enough that day? You know very well that even without Yi Li, you would not be able to enter the Prince Ding mansion." Princess Lingyun stared at him and said, "You are speaking up for Yi Li?" Lei Tingfeng snorted and said, "Pretend I didn't say anything. If you think you have the ability to provoke Yi Li, then go ahead. Let's see if she dares to shoot through your head next time. I don't care what you want to do. In 3 days, obediently get on the sedan chair and marry into the Li Wangfu. Don't force me to drug you. I am a princess, you dare. I thought that you knew your use when you made a fuss about coming to Dongchu." Lei Tingfeng looked mockingly at her. "You didn't think that just because you came to Dongchu to choose a bridegroom, you could marry whoever you liked? No matter how favored a princess was, she was still just a princess. A princess who was married to him, actually dared to put on airs in front of him?" West Hill Embassy. After sending Princess Lingyun back to her room, Lei Tingfeng turned around and returned to his own room. As soon as he closed the door, Lei Tingfeng's eyes darkened. His gaze shot to a certain spot in the room like a knife. The completely enclosed room was dark and unpredictable because there was no light. A slim figure in black sat beside a round sandalwood table. Lei Tingfeng's expression darkened as he stared at the back of the woman in black and asked, "What are you doing here?" The woman in black turned her face to the side, revealing a pair of moving starry eyes in the dim light. However, her eyes, which should have been as clear as water, were filled with obvious anger. "Why did you ruin my plans?" Lei Tingfeng snorted and sneered, "Spoil your plans? What has this prince done to ruin your plans?" "Ling Yun's matters." The woman in black gritted her teeth and said, "If it wasn't for your interference, how could Ling Yun have married into the Li Palace?" Lei Tingfeng relaxed his body a bit. He walked to a chair on the side and sat down as he said, "You still have the nerve to say that. If it wasn't for you talking to Ling Yun all day long, how could Ling Yun have married the Li Palace? Their original plan was not to marry a princess to a brainless prince. It was a pity that after Ling Yun's interference, the emperor would not want her no matter what." The woman in black snorted and said, "If Ling Yun had entered the Prince Ding mansion, wouldn't it have been better? Stop dreaming. Ling Yun has been fooled by you. Could it be that you also killed her?" Lei Tingfeng said with disdain, "Do you think that Imo Xiuyao is some kind of soft-hearted person? If Ling Yun enters the Prince Ding mansion, we will have to collect her corpse in less than a month. Even if she doesn't die, do you think that with Ling Yun's brain she won't be tricked by Imo Xiuyao and turn against him?" As if she was angered by Lei Tingfeng's mocking tone, the woman angrily said, "Isn't the reason I'm doing this to help you?" Lei Tingfeng sneered. His face clearly showed that he did not believe her. "Help me? Help me? Why didn't you have Ro Yun come? Aren't you certain that with Ling Yun's personality, Imo Xiuyao would never fall in love with her? What a pity. This prince feels that Imo Xiuyao might fall in love with Yi Li. Impossible." The woman angrily shouted. She quickly realized that she had lost her composure. The black-clothed woman let out a breath and said with a smile, "Don't try to trick me. Imo Xiuyao's eyes are above his head. How could he fall in love with a woman as good as Yi Li?" "Good for nothing," Lei Tingfeng muttered. He carelessly swept his eyes over the black-clothed woman before saying, "Imo Xiuyao's eyes are above his head? That's not necessarily true." "Enough. I'm not here to argue with you." Lei Tingfeng lazily looked at her and said, "Then you can just tell me why you came to my room at this time." "I want to stay in Dechu State for a period of time," the black-clothed woman said. "That's fine. Just don't come back to Xiling in the future." Lei Tingfeng waved his hand and nonchalantly indicated that she could leave. "You?" The black-clothed woman angrily glared at him. She couldn't say anything for a while. Lei Tingfeng coldly smiled and said, "You think I don't know what you want to do in Dongchu? It's rare to see a woman as greedy as you. However, you should be careful. Don't end up with nothing." The black-clothed woman hatefully bit her red lips under the veil. Lei Tingfeng, you won't be happy if you don't mock and ridicule me? Lei Tingfeng coldly snorted. He looked at the woman in front of him with an icy gaze that faintly revealed a trace of hatred. You can't live if you don't go around seducing men? Don't be delusional. Emo Shuyao won't want you. Do you know where the painting you had people send over went? Lei Tingfeng looked at her. Suddenly, a malicious smile appeared on his face. The black-clothed woman vigilantly stared at him. Lei Tingfeng looked at her with interest. Seeing her eyes gradually become flustered under his gaze, he smiled and said, Emo Shuyao sent it to Suja that day. No matter how beautiful Su Zuidi is, she's just a dead person to Emo Shuyao. What do you think you can do? Do you want to make a bet? I feel that Emo Shuyao will definitely fall in love with Yi Li, if possible. The black-clothed woman's anger almost wanted to burn Lei Tingfeng to ashes. This time she took even longer to calm down. She smiled sweetly at Lei Tingfeng and said, Then what about you? Shilling Country's Genom of Gojoseon, why are you so interested in Yi Li? Lei Tingfeng's eyes flashed. He quickly smiled and said, Because she's Emo Shuyao's woman. From this point of view, her value is obviously much higher than yours. The black-clothed woman's eyes moved. She softly smiled and said, Then. Don't you want Emo Shuyao's woman? Huh. Think about it. If the whole world knew that Emo Shuyao's wife ran away with another man, how interesting would that be? Lei Tingfeng frowned. He stared at the black-clothed woman in disgust and said, Knowing Emo Shuyao is probably the most unlucky thing in his life. If I want to defeat Emo Shuyao, I will defeat him fair and square. There's no need to use such a method. How could that be? Meeting me should be the happiest thing in his life. Of course, I also think so. The black-clothed woman said softly. Her enchanting eyes revealed traces of nostalgia. Also, Emo Shuyao is already crippled. He will never go onto the battlefield again in this life. From another point of view, he will never be defeated. You actually still think that you can defeat him fair and square? The undefeated legend of the Ding Palace for hundreds of years. Chapter 116. That's enough. Get out. We'll return to Xiling in 3 days. You can try to stay in Eastern Chu. According to what I know, Han Mingyue has already returned to Jiangnan. You can see if Emo Shuyao will be merciful to you. Lei Tingfeng's face darkened as he spoke coldly. The black-clothed woman stood up and looked at him with grievance. I know why you treat me so badly. You're jealous, aren't you? Or do you think I don't look good wearing a veil? As she spoke, the woman raised her hand to take off the veil on her face. Lei Tingfeng suddenly picked up the teacup on the table and threw it at her. Get out. Humph. After being reprimanded so rudely, the black-clothed woman put down her hand and glared at the man in the chair before leaving in a huff. Yi Li returned to the Prince Ding mansion. Emo Shuyao was reading in his room. Hearing the sound of footsteps, he raised his head to look at her. You're back? Did something happen to old Madame Yi? Yi Li waved her hand and said uninterestedly, What could happen at this time? Fourth sister went home to cry and make a fuss. Grandmother wanted me to go back and say a few words. She's never been easy to deal with, so how could she listen to me? But on the street, I met the heir of Xiling and Princess Lingyun. Emo Shuyao looked at her and raised his eyebrows. Yi Li thought about it and decided there wasn't much to talk about. She turned around and went in to change into some light clothes. When she came out, she saw Emo Shuyao was still sitting in the room with his head lowered, reading. She called Qing Xia and the others to bring out some plain-colored cloth. Qing Shuang had always been clever. Not long after Yi Li gave the order, she had already brought the cloth over with a smile before she had even sat down. They were all light colors like the moon, white, light green, and beige. She also thoughtfully brought over all kinds of utensils. Yi Li took the cloth and looked at the man in front of her. Her faint brows furrowed together. Emo Shuyao raised his head to look at her conflicted appearance. He smiled faintly. What's wrong? Not satisfied with the clothes made in the residence? She heard that there were 2 embroidery workshops in the capital that sold pretty good stuff. She would ask them to send some over to take a look. You don't have to be so troubled. Yi Li was speechless. If I bought clothes for you from outside, wouldn't Mother Lin and wet nurse nag me to death? She then looked at her own clothes. Was she that picky? Gritting her teeth, Yi Li said, Lend me one of your old clothes. Emo Shuyao raised his eyebrows and looked at Yi Li, who was trying her best to remain expressionless. Slowly, her gaze shifted to the cloth on the table. Her eyes moved slightly as she looked at Yili and said with a smile, "Go get it yourself." Ever since he was sent to this courtyard to recuperate, Chief Steward Mo had ordered people to move all the clothes in his room here. However, his new wife seemed to have a good habit of not touching other people's things, even if the other person was her husband. So even though their things were placed together, in reality they were placed separately. No one would touch the other's things. Yili snorted softly. She stood and walked into the room. But after walking a few steps, she suddenly stopped. Turning back, she took the measuring tape from the needle and thread box and walked in. Mo Shuyao stared at the simple and elegant cloth on the table in a daze for a while. Then he suddenly smiled faintly. Her eyes, which were originally a little cold, now had some real warmth. Either you didn't do something at all or you did it as quickly as possible. So Yi Li's daily life had an extra task of needlework. The two old mamas were comforted by this. Seeing their young miss play with knives and swords every day after getting married, the two mamas were very anxious. Even though the prince didn't say anything, but how could a Wang Fei play with knives and swords every day? Other than San Yi, the Su family hadn't had a martial artist in hundreds of years. It definitely was San Yi who taught young miss bad things. The two mamas who didn't know the truth silently blamed Su Qingfeng, who was about to enter the army. Their Wang Fei was making clothes for the prince for the first time. This attracted the attention of the mamas and the servant girls. When they started to eat, Yili found something very depressing. She didn't know how to make clothes for men. When her mother was still alive, she wasn't old enough to learn how to make clothes. After her mother passed away, there was no one to teach her, and there was no need for her to do so, so she had forgotten about it. In the end, she could only helplessly let Lin Mama teach her how to make clothes. After making the clothes, the servant girls surrounded Yili to discuss what pattern to use, what color of embroidery thread to use, and what kind of pouch to match it with. Everyone was talking at once and arguing non-stop. Pianpian Mo Shuyao didn't know what had happened, but his reading location had changed from the study to their room. Even though they were in the outer room, Yili, who was surrounded by the servant girls in the room, felt that Mo Shuyao could hear what they were muttering about. She couldn't help but feel angry and annoyed. She wanted to slap these talkative servant girls until they fainted. Wang Fei. Seeing Yili pick up the cloud pattern and prepare to make the thread, Qing Shuang shouted disapprovingly. She looked like she wanted to come forward and destroy the pattern in her hands. Yili raised an eyebrow at her. Qing Shuang said, "Wang Fei, you're giving this to someone. How can you take out a pattern that is too normal?" The veins on Yili's forehead jumped. It was just making clothes, wouldn't this girl have too many opinions? Qing Shuang ignored Yili's dissatisfied expression and quickly put a stack of patterns in front of Yili. There were all kinds of dragon patterns, eagle patterns, tiger patterns, and complicated patterns of flowers and plants, auspicious patterns, etc. Qing Shuang looked at Yili's dark expression and hurriedly took out one of the patterns. She said in a small voice. Qing Shuang asked for Wang Fei. "The prince likes this one." Glaring at the image of an eagle in the sky, she wanted to poke Qing Shuang with a needle. Qing Shuang saw her young miss's unfriendly expression and hurriedly made a begging expression before running out. Yili stared dazedly at the patterns on the table. She suddenly sighed and took the embroidery basket to the side to make the thread. Qing Xia served from the side and said, "Qing Shuang is a naughty girl, but she's thinking for Wang Fei. It's best if Wang Fei isn't angry at her." Yili looked up at her and said helplessly, "This girl is usually spoiled. She's always mischievous." Qing Yu pursed her lips and snickered. Qing Shuang is really energetic. Why don't Wang Fei punish her to do embroidery? Qing Xia covered her mouth and snickered. Qing Yu's punishment is too harsh. But if Wang Fei can calm down, Qing Shuang will be happy to accept the punishment. Qing Shuang had a jumpy temper. She had always been impatient with needlework. Usually, it was as if she wanted her life to finish embroidering a handkerchief. Yili's eyes turned and there was a smile on her face. "Very good. Tell Qing Shuang to embroider a winter plum for me. It must be done in half a month. Otherwise, let her do as she sees fit." Qing Wan and others blinked and smiled. They secretly mourned for Qing Shuang in their hearts. You know that Wang Fei is shy, but you still ran to ask the prince. Isn't this sending yourself to be punished by Wang Fei? What does Li want to embroider? Mo Shuyao's voice came from outside. Everyone quickly turned and bowed. "Prince?" Mo Shuyao looked at the three girls who were full of smiles and said, leave. Chapter 117. The three bowed and retreated, leaving some space for the prince and Wang Fei. Seeing Emo Shuyao come over, Yili looked with some embarrassment at the things in her hands and said, "Is Prince so idle? He's wandering around the room all day." Emo Shuyao smiled slightly and said, "He doesn't need to go to court and doesn't have anything to do. Naturally he is idle. He has been very busy these days." Yili rolled her eyes at him in exasperation. Did he not see what she was busy with? The wheelchair stopped next to Yili. Emo Shuyao said with a light laugh, "Li, don't be embarrassed. Even if your embroidery is not good, I will not laugh at you." "Very good." Yili angrily poked a needle on her clothing. He dared to say that her embroidery was not good. Even second aunt praised her embroidery. Tilting her head to look at Emo Shuyao, Yili had a fake smile on her face. "No, my embroidery is not good. I don't dare to stain Prince's eyes. Get someone from the sewing room to sit so I don't have to worry." Emo Shuyao smiled helplessly. "I mean that no matter what Li embroidery looks like, it is the best in Ai's eyes." Yili snorted and ignored him. She turned around and went back to work. Emo Shuyao sat silently at the side and looked at Yili's gradually focused expression. A warm smile appeared at the corner of his lips. Because the Li palace had lost face during the previous wedding, the virtuous imperial concubine was probably trying her best to regain her face this time. The ceremony of marrying an equal consort was as grand as marrying a D consort. But due to Princess Lingyun's status as a princess of a country, outsiders could not find fault with it. This made Yi Ying's already ugly face even more gloomy. On the day of the wedding, Yili and Emo Shuyao beat Li Wang Fei together. Emo Jingli personally stood at the door to welcome them. Yili habitually found that Emo Jingli still had a stiff face. There was no joy on his face. If it wasn't for his new red wedding robes, if it wasn't for his good looks, the guests passing by would have wondered if they should turn back home and change into black and white to attend the wedding. Now Yili really sympathized with Ying. Emo Jingli wasn't cold by nature, he was just used to pretending. If any man dared to show such a half-dead expression at her wedding, she would kick him to death no matter if it was her previous life or this life. Indicating that Emo Jingli did not need to care about them, Emo Shuyao and Yili entered the Li Wang Fu with the steward of the Fu. Emo Jingli did not have the time to care about them. Maybe it was to get back the face she had lost last time. Virtuous consort Zhao not only made the wedding extravagant, she even invited the Empress Dowager to personally host her son's wedding. To be able to flatter the Empress Dowager, it was naturally a great opportunity to curry favor. Therefore, as long as the officials were in Jing City, regardless of whether they had received the invitation or not, they would think of ways to come and congratulate them. The Li Wang Fu was filled with guests and was as busy as a marketplace. "What is it? What is Li thinking about?" Seeing Yi Li's strange and conflicted expression, Emo Shuyao asked with a smile. Yi Li shook her head and said with a smile, "Nothing, I'm just curious. Does Li Wang have the same expression all year round? Isn't today a day of great joy?" If it was anyone else, they might have thought that she was dissatisfied with the marriage bestowed by the emperor. Emo Shuyao turned his head to look at Emo Shuyao at the door and said with a smile, "Jingli has never liked to smile since he was young. Those who are familiar with him are used to it." Yili didn't really care about this issue. The wedding hadn't started yet, so the male guests and female guests were arranged separately. When they entered the residence, the stewards came forward to invite Emo Shuyao and Yili to their respective places. The steward of the Li Wang Fu led Yili into the inner Fu. The female guests that had come to attend the wedding were all gathered in the garden of the Li Wang Fu. They were resting and chatting in the small pavilions in the garden. Passing through the garden where the noble women gathered in twos and threes, Yili was led to an elegant small pavilion on the east side of the garden. Inside there were some women of high status or older. Virtuous concubine Zhao brought Yi Ying to accompany them personally. Seeing Yi Ying's bitter expression and the dissatisfaction between the brows of the virtuous consort, Yili sighed in her heart. Yi Ying and Yi Yu were both women of Wangshi. They were both beautiful. How could they be so different? It seemed that old Madame Yi and Minister Ye's decision was right. Even if Yi Ying's appearance was better than Yi Yu's with her personality, she would have been torn to pieces if she was sent to the palace. Greetings to old consort. Yili went forward to greet the old consort. The virtuous consort was about to get up to greet her. Yili certainly would not let her get up. Without waiting for her to speak, she said with a smile, "So many people have arrived, but I am the latest. Old consort, please don't blame me." The virtuous consort moved her body and sat down firmly. She smiled proudly, "Not at all. Princess Ding coming to our Li Palace brings light to our humble dwelling. I wonder if Prince Ding—" Yili said with a smile, "Prince Ding is also here. He went outside first and will come to greet old consort later." The virtuous consort praised Yili with a face full of smiles. Of course, the two people involved did not take these praises seriously. Although the virtuous consort was not young, she was of the same generation as Xiuyao. She never expected the Prince of Ding to come and greet her in person. After exchanging greetings, Yili glanced at the people sitting in the pavilion. Almost all of them were acquaintances. However, Xiaoyang Grand Princess, Xiaoren Grand Princess and old Madame Hua had not arrived yet. The southern marquise sitting in front stood up and gave Yili her seat. Yili thanked her with a smile. The southern marquise was the mother-in-law of the eldest daughter of the Yi family, Yi Zhen. Yili had a good impression of this eldest sister's husband. She smiled and chatted with the southern marquise. As she listened to the noblewomen casually talk about the gossip in the capital, Yili occasionally added a few words. Yili was puzzled to find that Yi Ying, who was sitting next to the virtuous consort, was almost completely silent. Sitting there all alone, she looked more like a beautiful puppet. Because of today, Yi Ying's dress was different from her usual elegant and refined appearance. She wore a bright red princess dress with gold peonies entwined around it. It made her look even more unnatural. It made people feel inexplicably uncomfortable just by looking at her. It had to be said that Yi Ying had been spoiled by Wang Shi to the point that she did not look like a legitimate daughter of a noble family at all. Wang Shi had spent all of Yi Ying's intelligence and time on learning the 4 arts of music, chess, calligraphy, painting, poetry, singing and dancing. In fact, there were many noble ladies who did not know these things at all, or only picked 1 or 2 to learn. They had a good enough family background and did not have to worry about not being able to marry into a good family. It was better to have the reputation of being a talented girl. However, between the reputation of being a talented girl and the means of being in power, anyone would choose the latter. Speaking of which, Princess Ding and Ying haven't had a good talk in a long time. It's not good for us old women to have the princess consort sit here with them. Ying accompany Princess Ding for a walk. The virtuous consort sensed Yi Li's gaze on Yi Ying and did not make things difficult for her. She directly ordered Yi Ying. Yi Ying looked at Yi Li and pursed her lips as she stood up. Yi Li stood up and smiled at the virtuous consort. "Since that's the case, thank you for your consideration. Everyone, Yi Li will leave first." Chapter 118. Watching the 2 sisters leave, Nan Marquis Furen smiled. "Speaking of which, this Princess Ding speaks in a gentle manner and has good manners. If she was a daughter of an ordinary family, who knows how aggrieved she would be. No wonder old Madame Hua praised Princess Ding so much." Everyone agreed. They all had daughters. If Princess Ding did not marry, who knew if it would be their daughter's turn to marry into the Ding King's residence? The Ding King's residence had a high status, but Prince Ding did not have any power in the court. Furthermore, he was a disabled person who could not walk. If their daughter, who they had painstakingly raised, were to marry into his residence, wouldn't their hearts ache? Therefore, towards Yi Li, who married into the Ding King's residence first, it was inevitable that they would feel sympathy and pity for her. Looking at this girl, she was only 15 or 16 years old. To be able to have such a calm and composed temperament after marrying such a husband, she was indeed not bad. On the contrary, Princess Consort Li, who was once envied by all the noble ladies in the capital, was a little disdainful. Wasn't she the #1 beauty who was proficient in the 4 arts? She did not even know when to advance or retreat when interacting with others. No one knew what Prince Li saw in her. She did not seem like she came from the same residence as Princess Ding. Of course, everyone only kept this evaluation in their hearts and would never say it in front of the virtuous consort Xiao. Yi Li brought Yi Ying to walk in the garden. Although Yi Li tried her best to choose a remote place to walk, the 2 of them had different statuses and attracted a lot of attention. Fortunately, everyone knew their limits. They understood that Princess Ding and Princess Consort Li wanted to reminisce about the past and did not come forward to disturb them. Yi Li glanced at Yi Ying's aggrieved and resentful look and frowned. She asked helplessly, What's the matter with you? Mo Jingli has not married Consort Ping yet. Who are you trying to show your resentful face to? Yi Ying glared at her with resentment and said faintly, do you think Prince truly loves me? Yi Li rolled her eyes in her heart. If he truly loved you, there wouldn't be this scene, alright? Back then, he clearly said that he only liked me and would only treat me well. Yi Li tried her best not to let her numb face become distorted. Her heart twitched when she imagined Mo Jingli's expressionless face expressing his feelings to Yi Ying. Young lady, how good must your eyesight be in order to make yourself believe that he's sincere to you? You don't even need to show me any expression. Why has everything changed since we got married? Yi Ying asked in a daze. Well, Yi Li felt that she was suddenly possessed by the Virgin Mary and wanted to comfort Yi Ying. Isn't there a saying? Marriage is the grave of love. Since you're already lying in the grave, don't think about the past. The sooner you die, the sooner you can reincarnate. But don't be silly. That's something beyond the grave. Yi Ying was stunned by her sudden strange words. She lowered her eyes and muttered in a daze, grave? I really shouldn't have gotten married? Yi Li only wanted to slap her own mouth. She continued to talk nonsense without changing her expression. Of course not. Men should get married when they're of age and women should get married when they're of age. Even if you don't go to this grave, you have to go to other graves. At least this one looks better, doesn't it? You see, these young ladies and young masters are all deeply affectionate before they get married. But have you read any novels about what happens after those scholars and beauties get married? Yi Ying was stunned and shook her head. Yi Li said with a straight face, that's right. Before marriage, both parties are in love with each other and have special feelings for each other. After marriage, there will be daily necessities. Don't be sad. At least 99% of the people in the capital live like this. No one will laugh at you. Yi Ying stared at Yi Li strangely as if she never knew her. After a long time she said unwillingly, why aren't you like this? There are only you and Prince Ding in the Ding Palace. Oh, young lady, are you envious of me? Yi Li waved her hand and said, our situation is different. You see, if I ask you to marry our prince, you definitely won't agree, right? I guess most people won't agree. So, won't Prince be mine alone? Is it like this? Yi Ying lowered her head and pondered. Yi Li was not interested in knowing what she was thinking about. She still remembered that she didn't really come to chat with Yi Ying and give her psychological counseling. Seeing Yi Ying lost in thought, Yi Li casually asked, speaking of which, I really didn't think that you would like Prince Li. I thought you would like a cultured and elegant young master. Yi Ying regained her senses and her face turned red. Biting her lips, she stared at her and said, are you here to blame me for stealing Prince Li, or are you here to laugh at me? Don't, I'm here to thank you. Yi Li held her hand and acted like she was deeply in love. Although we are not born from the same mother, we are still sisters, aren't we? Did fourth sister really think that I would fall out with you because of a man? In the past, I was only angry that you didn't tell me the truth. Although we weren't born well since young, when have I ever snatched the things you like from you? If you had told me properly at that time, we would have settled the engagement in private and wouldn't have caused such a commotion and made everyone lose face. Yi Ying looked suspiciously at the sincere Yi Li in front of her. Thinking back, she had indeed taken many things from Yi Li since young, but Yi Li never said anything. It was just that at that time, she couldn't wait for Yi Li's engagement to be known by everyone so that she would lose face. Who would have thought that in the end she would be the one to lose face? Thinking of this, even Yi Ying's prideful heart couldn't help but feel a little uncomfortable, but she would never admit it. Yi Li didn't look at her expression and sighed regretfully. Speaking of which, I always thought that fourth sister would be matched with the capital's #1 scholar or something in the future. A perfect match. Really, the world makes fools of people. Yi Ying blushed. Of course, she had also fantasized about what her ideal husband would look like. She had also fantasized about a handsome man in white gently holding her hand and gazing at her with deep affection. However, later on she met Prince Li. His identity as a prince and the joy of trampling Yi Li under his feet made her gradually forget her dreams. When she truly fell in love with Prince Li, she felt that it was just her childish thoughts when she was young. But now the ideal husband that she truly loved treated her like this. If it was someone else, they definitely wouldn't treat me like this. Yi Ying had some vague thoughts in her heart. You really don't hate me? Yi Ying looked at her hesitantly. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, You said it last time, wasn't that father's idea? Maybe father thinks that I'm not suitable for Prince Li. But now it seems that father was right, Prince Li and I are indeed not suitable. I'm very satisfied with my current life and Prince Ding is also very good. Looking at Yi Li's gentle and tolerant smile, the hesitation in Yi Ying's eyes gradually disappeared. She bit the corner of her lips with some grievance and said, Father didn't let me marry Prince Li because he knew that Prince Li would be like this, right? Mother always said that father and grandmother value you the most. Father must think that Prince Li isn't good, so he wants me to replace you. Yi Li looked at the sky. That's your mother wanting you to hate me, okay? How come I don't see that the two at home value me? Looking at Yi Ying, Yi Li felt some pity for Minister Yi. This was the precious daughter that he doted on and spoiled in the palm of his hand. Chapter 119. Who doesn't know that father dotes on you the most? Probably everyone makes mistakes. Do you still remember what father told you at that time? Yi Ying lowered her head and said softly, Father. Father said that Zhaoi Jiejie and I are sisters, so Zhaoi Jiejie naturally dotes on me more. If I marry Prince Li, I can also help Zhaoi Jiejie a little. With Zhaoi Jiejie around, no one dares to bully me. And if I don't marry Prince Li, I can only marry the son of an official in the court. If that was the case, if Yi Li married Prince Li, wouldn't she always be inferior to her? Yi Li nodded. If it wasn't for Prince Ding and her situation at that time, the emperor would never let the two daughters of the minister's manor marry the prince of the imperial family. But, just like that, Yi Li felt that something was wrong. Did her father really instigate his younger daughter to steal his elder daughter's fiancé just because he was too biased? It didn't make sense no matter how she thought about it. There must be something she didn't know. But looking at Yi Ying's appearance, she probably didn't know the truth. After so long, Yi Li had already understood a fact. Yi Ying looked arrogant and prideful, and her personality was really selfish. But if she was serious, her lethality was probably not as big as Yi Shan and Yi Lin. She was spoiled too much by Wang Shi, so she didn't learn her lesson. Even if old Madame Yi caught her and taught her a few lessons, she returned to her old ways after a few days. Thinking that she couldn't get any useful information from Yi Ying, Yi Li was ready to get up and leave, but she was pulled by Yi Ying. What should I do? Am I not your mother? Yi Li endured. You are Prince Li's wife. Even Princess Lingyun can't surpass your status. As long as you hold on to Mo Jingli's heart and don't let the virtuous old concubine hate you, life won't be so difficult. Yi Ying glared at her with dissatisfaction. She didn't want life to be difficult, she wanted to live a comfortable life. Yi Li helplessly took a deep breath and said, for example, right now, you need to accompany old imperial concubine to receive the guests and let others know that you are the legitimate Di Fei of the Li Palace. Do you understand? If you have any questions, go back and ask grandmother. You don't think that I, who just got married and don't have any in-laws to serve, know more than grandmother, do you? Yi Li didn't feel guilty at all. Anyway, Madame Dowager would be happy to give her advice. But if you are unhappy, you can write to me. If there's anything you don't understand, I can help you secretly. After all, we are sisters, aren't we? So if there's anything going on in the Yi family or the Li Palace, you must tell me secretly. After coaxing Yi Ying away, Yi Li let out a long sigh of relief. After chatting with Yi Ying for so long, she didn't get anything out of her. Young Master Feng San, come out if you've heard enough. Yi Li said lightly as she glanced at the treetops on the side. Ha! The luxuriant treetops were pushed aside, revealing a gorgeous red robe. Princess Ding, we meet again. It's a pleasure to meet you. But, how did Princess Consort know it was this one? Yi Li glanced at him with a wooden expression. If young Master Feng San doesn't dress so brightly and dazzlingly, and makes himself so fragrant. Fragrant. Feng Jiao raised the corner of his eye and raised his sleeve to smell. How could Suhajai's newest and most elegant magnolia fragrance be so fragrant? Wasn't it because he couldn't smell it when he got close? He Feng San was a distinguished young master with good taste, not a vulgar idiot who wanted to pour all the fragrant powder on himself. Looking at Feng Jiao's stiff and unsightly face, Yi Li lowered her eyebrows and smiled faintly. Feng Jiao inspected his appearance and found that there was nothing that damaged his image as an elegant young master. Then he attributed his exposure to Yi Li accidentally seeing the corner of his robe. With an intoxicated and narcissistic smile, he said, I didn't expect Princess Consort to be so concerned about this one. You could guess this one's identity just by seeing a small corner of my robe. Really an honor. Young Master Feng-san. Yili raised her head and smiled. Didn't anyone teach you that you shouldn't play with your friend's wife? Or should I pass on your words to the prince? Also, the reason why I'm sure it's young Master Feng-san is because in the entire capital, other than the bridegroom, no other man would dress so coquettishly. Feng Jiao's smile suddenly froze on his face and he almost fell from the tree. He helplessly shrugged and rubbed his stiff face, saying, "All right, Feng-san knows his mistake. Please forgive me, Princess Consort." Yili nodded with tolerance. Feng Jiao turned his face to the side, his handsome face twisting. He finally knew why Imo Xiuyao would marry Yili. They were like family. He had never seen a woman who could pretend better than Yili. Of course, he had never seen a man who could change his face better than Imo Xiuyao. Speaking of which, Princess Consort's analysis just now was really brilliant. Marriage is the grave of love? Thinking of what he had just heard, Feng Jiao became proud again. Did a Yao know what his dear Princess Consort was thinking? Yili didn't have a guilty conscience at all. She nodded seriously and said, "Young Master Feng-san, you have to believe this consort. This is definitely a warning that has been tempered thousands of times. I believe that young Master Feng-san agrees with this consort's words. Otherwise, how could a young master still be unmarried at such an old age?" Nonsense. This young master and Imo Xiuyao were the same age, all right? Rubbing his nose, Feng Jiao said with a bitter smile, "I want to go to the grave, but it's a pity that she doesn't like me." A faint sadness flashed across his handsome face. Yili didn't know how to comfort someone who had a one-sided crush on her. She could only say, "There are plenty of fish in the sea." Feng Jiao smiled bitterly as he cupped his hands to express his thanks for comforting her. Yili didn't want to disturb his sadness and said, "Then I won't disturb young master any longer. Goodbye." AI. Feng Jiao looked at the woman who turned to leave without any hesitation. He said in a daze, "Your prince wanted me to come see you. He wants you to be careful." "Many thanks." "Be careful?" Yili pondered as she slowly walked away. Feng Jiao angrily put the tree branch back to hide his figure. He grumbled, "What kind of person is this young master becoming? You even have to order me around for such a small matter. Are you worried that you won't come see for yourself? Imo Xiuyao, the reward you give better be worthy of this young master's contributions, otherwise." Just as she returned to the garden, Hua Tianxiang pulled Qin Zheng and Murong Ting over happily. "Yili, are you all right?" Qin Zheng pulled on Yili and asked with concern. Hua Tianxiang smiled and said, "Zheng I already told you not to worry. How can this fellow not be all right? Who in the capital doesn't know of Princess Ding's illustrious reputation? She can make the Xiling princess squat on the ground and cry just by scaring her." "Lili, good job." Murong Ting patted Yili's shoulder and praised loudly. She was also very regretful. It's a pity that this young lady didn't see what happened that day. "Lili, let's compete in archery when we have time." Yili waved her hand and said with a smile, "No need, I'm just scaring a little girl. I don't dare to compete in swordsmanship with General Murong's beloved daughter. Wouldn't that be showing off in front of an expert?" Murong Ting didn't buy it. This young lady doesn't believe it. In short, we must compete. Chapter 120. Alright Tingra, can you say something else? Do you want to be chased and beaten by General Murong again? Qin Jing said with a headache. Murong Ting snorted discontentedly. "Sheng you only know how to use my father to scare me." Yili looked curiously at Qin Jing and Hua Tianxiang. Unfortunately, the two of them kept silent under Murong Ting's threatening gaze. Hua Tianxiang gave her a look that said, "We'll talk about it later." Qin Jing pulled Yili and smiled. "Ever since Li'er got married, other than Tianxiang, we haven't seen Li'er." Yili smiled apologetically. "Recently, there were some small matters in the Fu, so I didn't go out. In a few days, can you come to the Ding King Fu to play?" The four of them found a place with fewer people and sat down. Qin Zheng and the other two asked about Yili's newlywed life with concern. Yili didn't want her friends to worry and picked out some fun and happy things to talk about. Hua Tianxiang said enviously, "Li is still the happiest. Those people who are afraid of marrying into the Ding King Fu can't think straight. Look at how comfortable Li's life is now. The moment she enters the door, she is the mistress of the household. She is simple and has less scheming. Prince Ding doesn't even have a concubine to sleep with. Murong Ting nodded in agreement. Tianxiang is right. Prince Ding is indeed a good person. This person worshipped the Ding King Fu without any principles. Qin Jing looked at Yi Li with a faint worry in her eyes. Yi Li smiled and held her hand to express that she was fine. Only then did Qin Jing nod slightly. A few friends who hadn't seen each other for a long time were chatting happily. Yi Li also temporarily threw those annoying questions to the back of her mind and chatted with her 3 friends. Suddenly, a sharp scream came from somewhere. Murong Ting jumped up from the stool and looked around vigilantly to find the source of the sound. Yi Li frowned and pointed in a direction. It seems to be coming from there. The 4 of them looked at each other. That seemed to be the resting place of the womenfolk. The 4 of them were not the only ones who heard the scream. At least half of the people in the garden heard it. At this time many people were curiously walking over. Murong Ting whispered, "This time the bride and groom are fine. What about the guest? The Li Prince Mansion's wedding must have been disliked by the heavens, right?" Qin Jing covered her mouth and glared at her fiercely. "Can you talk nonsense about this kind of thing? Let's go and have a look," Hua Tianxiang said, raising her eyebrows. It would be a waste not to watch the liveliness in the Li Palace. There was an exquisite little courtyard that was connected to the front yard. The Li Palace had arranged for the womenfolk to rest here. There was only one entrance to the completely independent courtyard that led to the garden. This prevented the guests in the front courtyard from accidentally bumping into the womenfolk, and also prevented the guests from disturbing the womenfolk living in the manor. By the time Yi Li's group of 4 reached the entrance of the courtyard, many people had already entered. Yi Li stood at the entrance and looked around. Hua Tianxiang asked in a low voice, "Li, what's wrong?" Yi Li shook her head and whispered with a smile, "I don't know what happened. That woman who screamed just now was really loud." In this kind of courtyard, if it was in the room, it was impossible for half of the garden to hear it. Therefore, the biggest possibility was that someone deliberately stood in the courtyard and screamed to attract people over. "Let's go to the back. There's no need to rush to watch the liveliness," Yi Li whispered. Hua Tianxiang looked at her in confusion. Although she did not know why she said this, she did not object. Instead, he and Qin Jing grabbed Murong Ting, who wanted to rush forward from the left and the right. Heavens, how could this be? As soon as they stepped into the reception pavilion, they saw 2 girls come out in a panic with red faces. One of them said, "Quickly send someone to invite the virtuous consort." The 4 of them looked at each other. Something really happened. Murong Ting said, "Jing, you wait outside. I'll go in and take a look first." Yi Li grabbed her and said calmly, "Murong, you accompany Jing and Tianxiang. I'll go in and take a look." Seeing the 2 girls' faces as red as apples, Yi Li could almost guess what had happened inside. No matter what, she was a close person. If Murong Ting, an unmarried daughter, saw something she should not see, then it would not be good. Qin Jing and Hua Tianxiang were also clever. They understood Yi Li's meaning after thinking about it. Hua Tianxiang said, "Why don't we wait?" There was no hurry to watch the liveliness. Yi Li shook her head. "I'll go and take a look first." She was most worried that Yi Ying, that idiot, did something she should not have done. And as Li Wangfei's sister, it was not right for her to stand by and do nothing at this time. "Don't worry, you wait here. The virtuous consort should be here soon." Turning inside, there were many people standing at the door of one of the rooms. They all stood at the door with strange expressions, not knowing whether to enter or leave. Yi Li swept a glance. Most of them were young women, and there were a few young daughters-in-law. Those of high status were accompanied by the virtuous consort to talk. Those who could manage the household and were steady found a place to gather and talk. At this moment, most of the people playing outside were young girls and young women. Seeing Yi Li walk in, someone finally recovered. "Ding, greetings to Princess Ding." A woman dressed as a young woman saw Yi Li and hurriedly bowed. Although she tried to be elegant, she could not hide the embarrassment on her face. "Greetings to Princess Ding." Everyone hurriedly bowed. Yi Li looked at everyone who had different expressions on their faces. Then she heard a series of moans and gasps coming from the half-closed door. Speechless, she went forward and closed the half-closed door under everyone's shocked gazes. She calmly said, "Let's go out first. The virtuous consort and Li Wangfei should be here soon." Everyone blushed in shame. It was not that they did not understand the principle of not listening to indecent things, but they were dumbfounded by this strange situation. Everyone could not quietly come and quietly leave as if nothing had happened, right? Wang Fei is right. Let's go quickly, a woman said. The others agreed. Unfortunately, there was someone who didn't want to let this matter go smoothly. A servant girl appeared out of nowhere and rushed over while crying. Princess. Princess is inside. Clang. The door that had been closed was pushed open by the Yahuan. The scene inside was unobstructed. The women present were petrified. Princess. Heavens, what had happened to them? Yili calmly looked at her left hand that had missed and silently took it back. Alright, she was being nosy. But that damned Yahuan dared to touch her. So what if she knew martial arts? Hearing it was one thing but seeing it was another. The young misses that finally recovered from their shock couldn't help but scream. Instantly ear-piercing screams filled the room. Yili helplessly wanted to rub her ears. Pitiful little girls, go back and drink a few thousand calming tea. Fortunately, even though the people inside were very focused, they were still able to notice such a large commotion when the door was pushed open and a person rushed in. So the moment the door was pushed open, the people inside quickly grabbed the blankets and tightly wrapped the two people inside. Actually, it was fine. There was still a veil screen in front of the window. Yili silently thought. Chapter 121. But the intruder girl obviously didn't want to let go of ruining her master's reputation. She instantly let out an even more shrill cry. Prince, what did you do to the princess? Was there a need to do this? The servant girl's shrill cries instantly extinguished the screams of the noble maidens outside. Everyone looked at each other in dismay. Which prince and which princess were these? They deeply felt that the Li Palace had never looked at the almanac for the wedding. What happened here? Xian Zhao, old concubine, finally rushed over with people. Seeing the crowd at the door, she asked in a deep voice. Xian Zhao, old concubine, also knew that it was probably not a good thing. There were not many people who came with her. Only a few of them seemed to be hard to refuse. But in Yi Li's eyes there was no difference. Old concubine here. Yi Li hesitated and said, let the young ladies go out to rest first. Xian Zhao, old concubine, looked at Yi Li with a flicker in her eyes. She nodded and said, Princess is right. The young ladies have been frightened. Please go out to have a cup of tea and rest for a while. Everyone naturally agreed. One by one the young ladies left the place with a strange atmosphere. Yi Li followed the crowd and prepared to leave with the crowd. But she was stopped by Yi Ying, who was standing beside Xian Zhao, old concubine. Third sister, can you stay? We don't know what happened here. Xian Zhao, old concubine, also nodded and said, yes, it's good that Princess Ding is here. If anything happens she can be a witness. Let's go in and take a look. Yi Li didn't know what expression she should show. She laughed dryly and said, in that case, it's better to ask the two inside to tidy up and then come out to meet us. Xian Zhao, old concubine's expression changed slightly. She shouted in a deep voice, impudent, come out. A sobbing sound came from inside, followed by the sound of people scrambling around. Not long after, a tall figure followed by a petite girl came out from behind the screen. Leah, why are you here? Old concubine Xian Zhao says harshly. The tall man's clothes are messy and his face is ashen. If he is not Mo Jingli, who should be entertaining guests in the front hall? Prince. Ying screamed, pointing at the two people who came out. Her delicate body was on the verge of collapse. Everyone's gaze shifted from Mo Jingli to the woman behind him. Just like Mo Jingli, the woman's clothes were disheveled and her hair was disheveled. Her coquettish eyes were still filled with tears. Some ambiguous light red marks extended from her neck to her collar. Princess Xixiao. The voice of the Marquis Nan standing next to Consort Dowager trembled slightly. Even though the emperor had not officially taken Princess Xixiao as a consort, how could they, the noble families with their own information channels, not know that the palace was preparing for the coronation ceremony? Even the Ministry of Rites had decided on the title. Looking at Princess Ding, who was supporting Yi Ying, the Marquis Nan immediately made up her mind. Consort Dowager Princess Ding, it's really inconvenient here. Let's go out first. Yi Li nodded, Madam is right. Consort Dowager, let's go out first. Consort Xian Zhao glanced at Mo Jingli and Princess Xixiao with an ugly expression. She nodded, Princess Ding is right. Let's go out first. Tidy up and come out immediately. When they returned to the hall, the other womenfolk had been sent to other courtyards to rest by Consort Dowager. Yi Li and the others naturally could not leave for a while. Seeing the stiff and ugly expressions of the Marquis Nan and the other madams who came with consort Xian Zhao, Yi Li felt much better. Anyway, she had nothing to do with it. She could just treat it as watching a play. Ying sat next to consort Xian Zhao and sobbed, making the originally gloomy and stagnant flower hall even more gloomy and depressed. Consort Xian Zhao was impatient with her crying. She glanced at her and said coldly, "Shut up. You only know how to cry." Ying did not care that Consort Dowager was angry. This sudden incident was the biggest blow to her. What was more devastating than her beloved husband rolling around in bed with another woman on the same day as his wife? Prince did this kind of thing. Why did Consort Dowager scold me? It's not my fault. Consort Xian Zhao said impatiently, "Shut up and sit aside." Such a big thing had happened. Even if Consort Xian Zhao wanted to hide it, she could not. Moreover, there were too many people here today. Just by looking at the expressions of the womenfolk on the way here, they knew that most of them knew what had happened here. Consort Xian Zhao would not deceive herself. She directly sent people to the front hall to invite a few royal relatives who were close to Li Wangfu over. At the same time, she sent someone to quickly report to the Empress Dowager who had not left the palace to support her son's wedding. When the royal relatives came over, Mo Jingli and Princess Xixiao were almost done tidying up and walked out one after the other. Ying saw that although Princess Xixiao had carefully washed up, her eyes were still full of love and she looked shy after making love. She wanted to pounce on her and tear her apart. "You slut." Princess Xixiao looked at Ying who was pouncing on her and screamed in fright. She took a step back and fell into Mo Jingli's arms. Ying's eyes immediately turned red with anger. "You adulterous couple. You bitch, I'm going to kill you." Everyone hurriedly pulled Ying back, comforting her. It was such a mess that the few people who had just entered the door frowned. Yi Li turned back and saw Mo Xiuyao come in. She smiled faintly and ignored the mess at the side. She slowly walked over. "Why are you here?" Mo Xiuyao raised an eyebrow and looked at Consort Xian Zhao who was sitting on the main seat with an ashen face. Consort Xian Zhao had invited a few of Mo Jingli's uncles and imperial brothers. Among them, the Prince of Dinghua who had the highest rank could not be left out. Moreover, Princess Ding was already here. There was no difference if Prince Ding was added. "King Li, what the hell are you doing?" An old prince with a white beard and an extraordinary aura was so angry that his beard was blown up. He snorted and pointed at Ying who was crying at the side. "This is the princess that you want to marry no matter what? And today is your wedding. You invited so many people. What is the meaning of this? You've disgraced your imperial father and imperial brother." Mo Jingli's face was ashen. The corner of his mouth moved, but he did not say anything in the end. This old prince was only the late emperor's elder brother who was still alive. He was also the only uncle of Mo Jingqi and his brother. Naturally, he had great power. Even Mo Jingli did not dare to disobey this uncle. Another prince who was a few years younger pulled back the angry old prince and said, "Second brother, calm down. Let's sit down and listen to what Jingli has to say. Don't scare the child." This one's temper was obviously much better, but he also looked at Mo Jingli with displeasure. The remaining two were Mo Jingli's elder brothers. In the early years, for the sake of the throne, they did not have a good relationship with Mo Jingli and his brother. After listening to their two uncles, they found a place to sit down and watch the show. Chapter 122. Why is Li here? Mo Xiuyao asked softly. Yi Li looked at him helplessly. "I just happened to bump into her." Mo Xiuyao smiled faintly and did not ask more. He pulled Yi Li to sit beside him. Other than the sobbing Ying and Mo Xiuyao who had a calm expression and half covered his face, everyone else in the hall was probably very embarrassed. After all, what they were going to talk about now was rather unusual. What was even more unusual was the people involved. One was the younger brother of the current emperor, and the other was the emperor's chosen future concubine. Although the imperial family had seen all kinds of dark and filthy things, everyone knew to cover their faces. But at least everyone knew that they had to find a cloth to cover their shame. It was rare to see something like this happen in public and spread to almost all the noble ladies in the capital in an instant. "Shut up. What are you crying for?" The old prince was also annoyed by the never-ending voices. He slammed the table and scolded angrily. Yi Ying was startled and her crying stopped immediately. She stared blankly at the old prince with a face full of tears and did not dare to speak. The old prince snorted softly and then looked at the virtuous consort. "Consort, what is going on? Something like this has happened to the emperor." How would he explain it to the emperor? The old prince also knew why the virtuous consort Zhao had invited them over. The emperor would definitely be angry if such a thing happened. Mo Jingli had committed adultery with the emperor's concubine. Even killing him would be a light punishment. But the virtuous consort certainly did not want Prince Li to die. The Empress Dowager certainly did not want this. The emperor probably did not want this either. Also, the emperor probably did not want to offend Nanzhao right now. Then they had to plead for Prince Li and give the emperor a way out. The virtuous consort sighed and said, "I don't know what happened either. I just heard that something had happened here and hurried over." Yi Ying snorted and said shrilly, "What else could have happened? Wasn't it this slut who seduced the prince?" Yi Ying. Old concubine Xian Zhao frowned and stared at Yi Ying sternly. "Pay attention to your status. Don't treat yourself like those uneducated shrews. If you don't want to stay here, go back to your room." Yi Ying bit the corner of her lips and turned her head away without saying anything. The old prince frowned and looked at Mo Jingli, who was standing in the middle of the hall, and asked, "Jingli, you should be greeting the guests in the front yard at this time. Why are you in the ladies' resting area? Don't tell me you've forgotten the basic etiquette after getting married?" Mo Jingli had always been cold and arrogant. He had probably never encountered such an embarrassing situation in his life. Moreover, this was in front of Mo Xiuyao, his enemy since childhood, and Yi Li, whom he thought he had abandoned. This realization made him feel even more embarrassed. His entire face was filled with boundless anger. Someone sent a message to invite I over. "So, after coming over, you made love with the emperor's concubine in bed?" The young prince sitting on the side sneered. The ridicule in his eyes was obvious. These princes and Yi Li had met once before. The man who spoke was Mo Xiuyao's half-brother, Prince Mo Jingyi. Mo Jingli's face was gloomy as he shot daggers at him. Mo Jingyi didn't care. He sneered and simply raised his head to look at the roof. "Who sent the message? Who did you come to see? Even you can't enter the ladies' resting area without permission. Don't you know this rule?" Uncle Wang on the side also frowned and questioned. Everyone was in a bad mood. They were just attending a wedding and encountering this kind of situation. If it was an ordinary girl, they could just let Mo Jingli take her in. However, it was a princess, and a princess who had already been selected to be the emperor's concubine. After being dragged in by old concubine Xian Zhao, they had to get involved in this muddy water even if they didn't want to. At this time, everyone looked at Princess Xixia like they were looking at a slut. How could Princess Xixia not know what everyone's expressions meant? She hurriedly shook her head and said, "No. It wasn't me. I never sent a message to Prince." The old prince snorted. He stroked his white beard and cast a sidelong glance at Princess Xixia, saying, "You didn't? Then how did Prince Li happen to be in the princess room?" At that time, if the ladies weren't drinking tea and chatting, then the young girls would be playing in the garden. Why did the princess happen to be in the room? More importantly, Xiaoyang didn't seem to have come to the wedding banquet. Then why is the princess here? The old prince threw out questions one after another, seeming a bit aggressive. However, everyone who wasn't in a good mood clearly didn't have the energy to sympathize with Princess Xixia, this foreign princess. Princess Xixia shook her head in a panic. She didn't have the arrogance she had seen before. Looking in panic at the expressionless people in the parlor, Princess Xixia's eyes suddenly lit up. She pointed in a direction and said, "It's her. She must have framed me and the prince." Yi Li, who had been shot while lying down, realized that her guess from a few days ago hadn't been wrong. All foreign princesses had problems with their brains. "Put down your hand. Otherwise, I don't mind if you never use your hand again in this lifetime." Mo Xiuyao looked calmly at the agitated Princess Xixia and said coolly. Princess Xixia couldn't help but shiver. She unconsciously moved closer to Mo Jingli and didn't see the resentment that flashed through Yi Ying's eyes. "In the Dechu state, she is the only one I have a grudge against." Princess Xixia bit her lip and said, "And Prince Li also has a grudge against her. This is something everyone knows." Princess Xixia wasn't stupid. She knew very well that if she was thought to have seduced Prince Li with her status as the future imperial concubine, Even if the Dechu state killed her, Nanzhao wouldn't stand up for her. Therefore she had to push all the responsibility away. But at this moment she really couldn't figure out who wanted to repay her. Of the people present, only Yili had a grudge against her. Therefore pushing the blame onto her was the best choice. Princess Ding. Everyone stilled. Yili helplessly sighed and softly said, Princess, His Highness and I only arrived at the prince's mansion with His Highness in the afternoon. After that we went to see the old imperial concubine and the other madams. Around the afternoon, fourth sister and I left. We chatted in the garden for less than a quarter of an hour. After that we met up with the 3 young ladies of the Hua Mansion, Qin Mansion and General Murong's mansion. After that we stayed in the garden to chat. There were many misses in the garden. I believe that everyone can testify. Also when we found the 2 of you, it wasn't even 5 in the afternoon. In other words, it wasn't even 2 hours since I arrived at the Li Wang Fu. In reality, the only thing that could make people suspicious was the time I spent with fourth sister. That is, it was 5 in the afternoon. Princess Xixia didn't seem to have received the invitation and arrived at the Wang Fu before me and Prince. May I ask, what does Princess think this consort needs to know that Princess is in the Li Wang Fu and your exact whereabouts in a short 15 minutes and then have someone send a message to lure Prince Li over? Yi Li's words not only clearly explained her whereabouts, it also washed away the suspicion of her collusion with Yi Ying. Princess consort still missed out a bit, and still needs to deduct Prince Li's and Princess consort's. Therefore Princess consort Ding doesn't even have a quarter of an hour. Chapter 123. Hearing this, everyone looked at Princess Xixia with even more unkind expressions. She had done something so shameless, yet she still dared to accuse Princess Ding first. Princess Xixia froze. She didn't really hope to convict Yili just like this. She only hoped to stall for time to let her breathe. She didn't think that Yili would expose her lie right there and then. Princess Xixia, who didn't know what to do, could only cry bitterly, woo-woo. It really has nothing to do with me. Enough. The silent Emo Jingli stared at Yili for a long time. He suddenly said in a low voice, You don't need to force her anymore. I will take responsibility. Bang. The old prince slammed the table in anger. He glared at Emo Jingli, his face green and white. His finger trembled as he pointed at him, Bastard. You'll take responsibility? What responsibility? What do you think you're doing? A man dares to take responsibility for his actions? Emo Jingli giggled as he walked up to support the old prince. He giggled as he said, Imperial uncle, calm your anger. Li Wang probably forgot that Princess Xixia is Imperial brother's Imperial concubine Xia, our brother's sister-in-law. Calm your anger, calm your anger. If he hadn't said anything, the old prince wouldn't have been so angry. Now that he said this, the old prince's anger reached another level. Bastard thing. What happened to your sense of propriety, justice, integrity and honor? Forget it. I won't care about this matter. I can't care. You can do whatever you want. In a fit of anger, the old prince threw away his responsibility. The virtuous concubine hurriedly comforted, Prince, calm your anger. Jingli is insensible, that's why he said such disgraceful words. As his uncle, Prince, please don't blame him. Your Majesty, Your Majesty. The old prince glanced at her, softly snorting, Insensible? He really is insensible. Isn't it because you've spoiled him? Look at the things he's done this year. Which one of them is something a normal person would do? I think that sooner or later he will be able to pierce through the sky. Ever since Emo Jingli insisted on breaking off the engagement, the old prince had been very dissatisfied with this nephew of his. The engagement was bestowed by the late emperor when he was still alive, and the other party was the granddaughter of the Su family. As long as that missy didn't do anything serious, you should endure it no matter how dissatisfied you are. Now it seemed that this third young Miss Yi was fine. On the contrary, it was the fourth young Miss Yi that he wanted to marry who was not presentable. Old concubine Xian Zhao hid the displeasure in her eyes and could only try her best to smile at the old prince. The emperor didn't need them to say anything. If they really let Emo Jingli pass by like this, the emperor's anger would probably cause him to lose a layer of skin even if he didn't die. When the old prince finally put out the fire, he continued to ask, Where did the messenger go? Don't tell me you don't remember what he looks like? Also, who brought Princess Xixia in? A few days ago there were rumors about Prince Li and Princess Xixia. Xiaoyang Princess was very polite. After the emperor gave the decree, she kept Princess Xixia from going out. Even this time, Xiaoyang Princess didn't come to Mo Jingli's wedding. Then how did Princess Xixia come? I. Princess Xixia said in a wronged voice. When I came, the people at the door didn't stop me. She had come early and had come to the Li Palace many times before. Many people in the Li Palace knew her. So even though she didn't have an invitation, the people in the palace didn't stop her. The steward of the Li Palace came in to report that he had found some spices used to liven things up in the room. The people in the room were speechless. Princess Xixia had come to the Li Palace by herself, but the servants of the Li Palace didn't report to the master and didn't know. And Mo Jingli didn't know what was going on. After hearing the message, he completely ignored the rules between men and women and came to where the womenfolk were resting. Then, this wasn't a coincidence, this was melodramatic. Yi Li silently said in her heart. It seemed that the beauty that the emperor hadn't gotten was destined to fly away this time. Alright, wait for the Empress Dowager to come before dealing with it. Also, quickly send someone to inform Xiaoyang Princess to take Princess Xixia back. The old prince said impatiently. He turned around to look at Mo Xiuyao and added, Xiuyao, what do you think? Mo Xiuyao's smile was gentle and polite. Prince is the elder. Everything will be decided by you. The other people also quickly expressed that they would follow the old prince's lead. Fortunately, the Empress Dowager was still very concerned about her youngest son. Before Xiaoyang Princess arrived, the Empress Dowager had already arrived. Of course, this was also because the Li Palace was the closest palace to the Imperial Palace. The Empress Dowager was wearing a bright yellow phoenix robe. She angrily rushed in and said, Aija hasn't even left the palace and you've already sent someone to say that something has happened. What has happened on such a happy day? Haven't you lost enough face at the last wedding? On the side, Yi Ying's face paled. It was a pity that she didn't dare to face the Empress Dowager directly. She could only hide on the side and not make a sound. Everyone stood up to greet her. The Empress Dowager sat down and listened to the old prince and Xian Zhao Taifei recount what had happened. Without waiting for the two to finish, the Empress Dowager was already furious. She fiercely scolded Mo Jingli. When the Empress Dowager scolded her son, she naturally didn't dare to interrupt and could only listen. A few madams who had nothing to do with this matter wished that they could bet their ears and secretly swore in their hearts that they would not come to the Li Palace again after a few days. When the Empress Dowager finally finished venting her anger, Mo Jingli and Princess Xixia were kneeling on the ground begging for forgiveness. The Empress Dowager looked at Mo Jingli for a long time. Her expression finally softened. She gave a long sigh and said to the old prince, Brother Wang, what do you think should be done? The old prince stroked his beard and said, Since the Empress Dowager has graced us with her presence, this matter should naturally be decided by the Empress Dowager. The Empress Dowager's expression was somewhat sorrowful as she sighed and said, This matter really has damaged the emperor's face. Even if Aijia comes out to plead for leniency, I'm afraid it will be difficult to appease the emperor's anger. The old prince naturally understood what the Empress Dowager meant. Speaking of which, Jingli did such a shameful thing. It's because us uncles didn't discipline him properly. I and Brother Wang will personally go to the palace to plead for Jingli. We only hope that the emperor will give I this face. The Empress Dowager smiled gratefully and said, Brother Wang is the emperor's most respected uncle. The emperor will definitely not disrespect Brother Wang. Lear, quickly thank your uncle. Mo Jingli said in a deep voice, Jingli thanks uncle. Thank you Uncle Wang. The old prince gave a snort and didn't pay attention to him. Receiving the old prince's promise, the Empress Dowager was naturally very satisfied. Even though the old prince didn't care about court affairs, he had a lot of prestige among the imperial relatives. As long as he was willing to plead for leniency, most of the princes would give him face. Even if the emperor was angry, it wouldn't be good to punish him heavily. Xian Zhao Taifei was also very satisfied. Looking at Mo Jingli and Princess Xixia, she asked in a quiet voice, Empress Dowager Jejia, this Princess Xixia, what do you think? The Empress Dowager furrowed her brows and said, Aijia will go back and discuss with the emperor. After a few days we'll think of a way to let her enter the family. The Empress Dowager didn't hide these words from the noble women present. Princess Xixia's status was different. Unless she didn't need to see anyone for the rest of her life, this matter would spread sooner or later. Now that she had spoken, everyone present was smart and naturally knew what to say and what not to say. Chapter 124. I don't agree. I also don't agree. Two female voices came from inside and outside, causing everyone to be stunned. The person inside was naturally the pale-faced Yi-Ying who was on the verge of collapse. Outside, Princess Lingyun was wearing a red dress that was as beautiful as fire. Her red veil was lifted up but it did not come down. Her almond eyes were currently releasing flames. She stood at the door and looked up at the people in the hall as she said, "This princess does not agree. You Eastern Chu people should not think of humiliating this princess like this." Beside Princess Lingyun, Lei Tingfeng swept his eyes over the people in the audience and said in a cold voice, "Empress Dowager, isn't Eastern Chu going too far by doing this?" Before one wave had subsided, another wave came. Before anyone could speak, Princess Lingyun had already walked into the hall with large steps to Mo Jingli and Princess Xixia's side. In front of everyone she quickly and fiercely slapped Princess Xixia's face. "Slut." Half of Princess Xixia's face turned red and there was even a trace of blood coming from the corner of her lips. As if she still felt that it wasn't enough, Princess Lingyun raised her head to slap her again, but she was grabbed by Mo Jingli. "Have you caused enough trouble?" Princess Lingyun gave a disdainful laugh. She threw off Mo Jingli's hand and said with a cold smile, "No matter how much trouble this princess causes, I would not shamelessly seduce the groom at someone else's wedding. This kind of trash is actually a country's princess. You really are losing face for all princesses. I heard that you've been clinging to King Li since the beginning. You could hook up with whoever you wanted before, this princess did not care. But doing this kind of thing at this princess wedding is provoking this princess." The Empress Dowager knit her brows and said in a deep voice, "Princess Lingyun, King Li and Princess Xixia were innocent and were framed. If you have any dissatisfaction, this widow will have King Li apologize to you. Right now, in front of all these princes and madams, don't cause trouble." Princess Lingyun gave a cold laugh. She raised her hand to take off the red veil on her head and threw it to the ground as she said, "Apologize? This princess can't accept it. This princess doesn't want to marry anymore. What do you guys want to do? Anyway, if there's this bitch, there won't be me, and if there's me, there won't be her." Xian Zhao, old concubine, said, "What does princess want?" Princess Lingyun said proudly, "Let King Li kill this bitch personally, and this princess can pretend that nothing happened." "What?" Everyone was shocked. Mo Jingli shielded Princess Xixia behind him. He stared at Princess Lingyun and said, "Are you crazy? She is the princess of Nanzhao." "So what? I am the princess of Xiling. How could this princess be afraid of a mere Nanzhao small country?" Princess Lingyun raised her eyebrows. Lei Tingfeng coldly looked at everyone and said, "It seems like Lingyun was right. Eastern Chu does not place my Deling in their eyes. Since that's the case, I don't think there's a need to hold today's wedding. Prince Li, don't you agree?" Mo Jingli remained silent. Princess Lingyun coldly snorted and said, "Brother Wang, now you see. They don't place us in their eyes at all." Lei Tingfeng indifferently looked at Princess Lingyun and said, "Pack up your things, we're going back. Immediately go to the palace and say goodbye to the Eastern Emperor Chu. We'll leave in a bit." "Yes." Princess Lingyun disdainfully looked at Princess Xixia and Mo Jingli. Her eyes did not have the shame of the wedding being abandoned halfway. It was clear that she was very satisfied with this. "Your Highness, this matter can be discussed. This is related to the relationship between our two countries, so your Highness shouldn't be impulsive." The old prince gave a sigh and stood up to persuade him. Lei Tingfeng indifferently said, "Many thanks for Prince's concern, but Eastern Chu has gone too far in this matter. It wasn't my Xiling that was rude first. I believe that even if we go to the Eastern Emperor Chu, it won't be our fault. Prince Ding, Princess Ding. I ask the two of you to uphold justice. Don't the two of you agree?" Yili secretly hated Lei Tingfeng for slyly dragging them into this. In front of everyone's eyes, she revealed a somewhat reserved smile and said, "Your Highness, this matter is indeed His Highness King Li and Princess Xixia's fault, but there are still many questions that have not been answered. The most important thing is that this matter was an accident. Our Eastern Chu's sincerity towards your country is without a doubt. This point I believe your Highness won't deny it, right?" Didn't you bring Princess Lingyun here for a marriage alliance? I don't believe you're willing to bring her back. The old prince looked at Yi Li with praise and said with a smile, Princess Ding is right. If King Li has let down Princess Lingyun, we will do our best to make it up to Princess Lingyun. If this affects the friendship between our two countries, that is not good. I ask your highness to reconsider. Seeing Lei Tingfeng reveal a thoughtful expression, Princess Lingyun knit her brows and anxiously said, Royal brother. Lei Tingfeng glanced at her indifferently, then looked at the Empress Dowager and said, Lingyun is the princess that imperial uncle dotes on the most. When she's at home, no one can bear to let her suffer the slightest grievance. I wonder how Eastern Chu wants to make it up to Lingyun. Princess Lingyun slightly trembled and revealed a trace of disappointment on her face. However, under Lei Tingfeng's indifferent gaze, she did not dare speak again. The Empress Dowager said in a deep voice, What kind of compensation does your highness want? Lei Tingfeng's eyes flashed and he said in a clear voice, The future King Li's successor must be born from Lingyun. Most importantly, Princess Xixia could never have the status of a concubine or anything above a concubine. She can never have King Li's flesh and blood. Once these words were said, everyone present, no matter if they were male or female, old or young, couldn't help being stunned. They looked at Lei Tingfeng with eyes filled with surprise and dissatisfaction. No one dared to believe that Lei Tingfeng dared to raise such a bold condition. It had to be known that King Li had already married his first wife before marrying Princess Lingyun. Lei Tingfeng's condition was clearly asking that King Li's first wife, who was of noble birth in the Dechu state, could not give birth to King Li's heir before Princess Lingyun. The most important thing was that having a royal descendant with the Western Tombs bloodline was not something that any member of the royal family would be happy to see. This is impossible. Without even thinking, the Empress Dowager sternly refused. Lei Tingfeng raised his brows and said with a smile, Since it's like this, then there's nothing more to say. Goodbye. As for today's humiliation, I Deling will remember it in my heart. After speaking, he turned and pulled Princess Lingyun, saying, Let's go. Princess Lingyun had originally thought that this marriage would continue. She hadn't thought that her royal brother would give her such a pleasant surprise. Of course, she didn't say anything else. She glanced at Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li, who were sitting on the side listening, and turned to quickly follow Lei Tingfeng. On the day of King Li's marriage, the bride's cousin immediately pulled the bride and left. No one knew if the matter of King Li and Princess Xixia had spread through the capital, but the news of Princess Lingyun abandoning King Li and leaving on the day of the wedding had spread through the capital in an extremely short amount of time. Lei Tingfeng brought Princess Lingyun back to the embassy. He sent people to lock up the joyous Princess Lingyun in a room and didn't allow her to come out. Then he swung his arm and placed her in the deepest part of the embassy. He kicked the door open and entered. In the room with dim candlelight, the black-clothed woman was leisurely leaning against the soft couch and reading a book. When she saw him enter, she slowly sat up and said with a smile, You're back? Was Lingyun's wedding fun? Pa. Lei Tingfeng stared at her for a long time. Suddenly, he fiercely slapped her face that was covered by the veil. Slut. I told you not to act rashly. The black-clothed woman fell back onto the soft couch because of this sudden violence. When she recovered, she raised her head and fiercely glared at the man in front of her. She gritted her teeth and said, Lei Tingfeng. Chapter 125. Slut. What do you want to do? Do you really think that I don't dare to kill you? Lei Tingfeng's gloomy eyes contained a ruthless aura, and the words that came out of his mouth did not have a trace of warmth. The black-clothed woman froze and quickly reacted. She chuckled and said, You brought Lingyun back, right? Ha ha. In any case, you didn't agree to the marriage alliance with the Dechu state. Isn't this what you wanted? What are you unhappy about now? You idiot. Lei Tingfeng angrily scolded. Who do you think you are? There are many hidden talents in Dongchu's capital. Who do you think you can fool with your little tricks? Get up, we will immediately leave the capital. The black-clothed woman froze and there was some hesitation in her eyes. Lei Tingfeng coldly laughed and said, It's fine if you don't want to leave. In a moment I will send someone to send you to the Prince Ding mansion. Haven't you always been thinking about Mo Xiaoyao? Don't worry, when we return to Xiling, this prince will properly explain for you. No. The black-clothed woman screamed and stood up. She grabbed Lei Tingfeng and said, I'll go with you. No one understood Emo Shuyao better than she did. If she really fell into his hands, she would definitely die without a sound. Lei Tingfeng disdainfully pushed her hand away and turned to leave. Bold, afraid of death, and greedy woman, the wedding at the Li Palace had become a ridiculous farce without any accidents. What was worse was that the bride had run away before the wedding had even begun. Very quickly, the Li Palace's masters, including King Li, Princess Consort Li, and Consort Xian Zhao Dowager, were all summoned into the imperial palace by the emperor's edict. The bride was gone, the groom was gone, and the masters were gone. The guests naturally could not stay and freeload. Hence, the guests who had drunk a stomach full of tea and did not manage to eat anything could only take their leave. Not long later, the bustling Li Palace once again regained its tranquility. However, for some reason, the red gauze that was decorated with lanterns and colored banners seemed a little dim. Because the emperor did not summon Prince Ding and his wife into the palace, Yi Li and Emo Shuyao, who had attended the wedding halfway, also left the Li Palace with the other guests. However, as soon as he stepped out of the Li Palace, he ran into Su Qingchen, who he had not seen for a long time. Su Qingchen had always been elusive. Even the members of the Su family might not be able to see him whenever they wanted to. After Yi Li got married, she had only seen him once on the day she returned home. She was a little surprised to run into him now. After exchanging a few pleasantries, the three of them moved to Chu Xiong Pavilion to have a meal. What does Prince think about today's matter? Su Qingchen took a sip of the wine in his cup and softly praised. Everyone says that Chu Xiong Pavilion's wine and food are the best in the capital. It really lives up to its reputation. Yi Li lowered her head to eat while listening to the two's conversation. After the entire afternoon, she was really a little hungry. Brother Su's information is indeed very fast. Emo Shuyao praised. Su Qingchen did not ask what had happened. Instead, he directly asked for Emo Shuyao's opinion. This meant that he clearly knew what had happened in the Li Palace. Su Qingchen acted as if he did not hear his words. He softly sighed and looked at Yi Li with a little sadness. Li, why is your husband unwilling to call me big brother? Yi Li's throat choked and she forced herself to swallow. She then raised her eyes to look at Emo Shuyao and then looked at Su Qingchen. The corner of her mouth could not help but twitch. Su Qingchen was younger than Emo Shuyao by 3 years. It would be strange if Emo Shuyao was able to call him that. Moreover, even if Emo Shuyao was able to call him that, he would still have to call Su Qing's a second brother and even Su Qingbai fourth brother. Emo Shuyao handed a bowl of soup to Yi Li. He watched her drink a mouthful before turning to Su Qingchen with a faint smile. Brother Su, you're only Li Li's cousin. Su Qingchen smiled. I don't mind if Prince calls me eldest cousin. A sharp glint flashed across Emo Shuyao's eyes as his lips curled up slightly. Then this king thinks that Brother Su should still remember. This one was once indebted to Mr. Qingyun for guidance in his studies. And you are Master Qingyun's grandson. I am Master Qingyun's student. Or perhaps Ai's grandmother seems to have the same surname as the first madam of the Su family. They were from the same family. In terms of age, they were 2 generations apart, but in terms of seniority, they were actually of the same generation. Yi Li of course understood that Su Qingchen did not have any intention of making things difficult for Emo Shuyao. He was just joking. Yi Li took a handkerchief and lightly wiped the corner of her mouth. She smiled faintly. Big brother, when did you start caring about how you address people? If Prince really does address people the same way I do, wouldn't that make the most handsome man in the capital look old? Su Qingchen calmly swept his gaze over Emo Shuyao and Yi Li. He saw Emo Shuyao's natural action of handing the soup to Yi Li and a trace of satisfaction appeared in his eyes. Hearing Yi Li's words, he pretended to be displeased and glared at her. He lightly sighed. As expected, once you're married, you're siding with an outsider. Father and second uncle must be regretting agreeing to marry you off so early. The only girl of this generation of the Su family, she had become someone else's. Yi Li's beautiful face flushed a faint red. She said, Big brother, did you come here just to squeeze me? Su Qingchen shook his head. The smile on his face disappeared and he looked seriously at Emo Shuyao. Emo Shuyao pondered for a moment and said, Does Brother Su think that there's something wrong with today's matter? No. Lei Tingfeng left the capital with Princess Lingyun. Su Qingchen said, They didn't even say goodbye to the emperor before leaving. Emo Shuyao's left hand unconsciously groped for the warm jade at his waist. He frowned and said, Today's matter must have been secretly manipulated by someone, but it can't be Lei Tingfeng. The alliance with the Dechu state was something that was decided long before he came to the Dechu state. It's impossible for him to suddenly give it up. Unless something unexpected happened. Yi Li frowned and asked, has Lei Tingfeng's power reached the point where he can act on his own accord in this kind of matter? The marriage alliance between two countries was definitely not a small matter, even if both countries had bad intentions. But Lei Tingfeng could break the agreement just like that. Even if Mo Jingli was in the wrong first, if word got out now, Xiling would be in the wrong. Su Qingchen smiled faintly and said, it's not Lei Tingfeng who has this power. It's his father, Genom of Gojoseon, who has this power. The Emperor of Xiling is frail and sickly, and he only has a few princesses and a 7-year-old prince. Although Genom of Gojoseon does not have the title of regent in Xiling, he is the regent in reality. Then, is the marriage alliance with the Dechu state the Emperor of Xiling's idea or Genom of Gojoseon's idea? Mo Shuyao asked. Su Qingchen shook his head. Xiling and the Dechu state were old enemies. And the Su family's information was not powerful enough to infiltrate the Emperor of Xiling's palace. Mo Shuyao nodded and said, I will send someone to investigate. Yi Li felt that these two men were thinking too far ahead. She raised her eyes and asked, who let Princess Xixia into the Li palace? No matter how familiar Princess Xixia was with King Li, no matter how normal it was for her to enter and leave the Li palace. She was also a princess, right? A princess came to the Li palace on the day of King Li's wedding, but the servants did not think to report to the master. This was very illogical. Su Qingchen and Mo Shuyao were both startled. They stared thoughtfully and then exchanged a look. Su Qingchen suddenly let out a low chuckle and sighed softly, it seems that we have overlooked many things. These years we are used to being free and unfettered. As expected, we are still not used to the capital. Mo Shuyao frowned slightly. Brother Su is right. These years of seclusion, it seems that many changes have occurred in the capital that we are unaware of. I will send someone to investigate this matter. Chapter 126. Su Qingchen nodded and said, leaving it to the prince, I am naturally at ease. I will be leaving the capital in a few days. I probably won't be able to intervene in these matters in the capital. Yi Li paused. Big brother, you are leaving the capital? Returning to Yunzhou? Su Qingchen shook his head and smiled. No, I plan to go to Nanzhou. Nanzhou. Yi Li didn't understand. I remember hearing fifth brother say that big brother went to Nanzhou 2 years ago. Mo Shuyao held his wine cup and said with furrowed brows, you think something will happen in Nanzhou? Su Qingchen sighed and looked at Mo Shuyao. I don't believe you can see it. Right now anything can happen. As long as they waited until the Ding King's household completely declined, the various powers suppressed by the Ding King's household would take advantage of the situation and swallow up the Dechu state. No matter if it was Nanzhou, Xiling, northern tribes, or even the island countries overseas, who didn't drool at the Dechu state's most beautiful and fertile land on the continent. But the people in power only saw the danger of the Ding King's household. On one hand, they thought of ways to suppress the Ding King's household. On the other hand, they were afraid of a second Ding King's household appearing. Generally, the Ding King's household was unwilling to support and nurture a new commander. Had they never thought about what the Dechu state would do if they lost the Ding King's household and a commander who could replace them? Or did the person sitting high on the dragon throne think he could use his methods of playing with power to be invincible on the battlefield? Big brother, you think Nanzhou will act first? Yi Li asked. Although the people of Nanzhou were valiant, they were not as good at war as the northern tribes or Xiling people. Besides, after Mo Shuyao swept through the southern border, the present Nanzhou might not be able to fight against the Dechu state. Su Qingchen said, originally it shouldn't be, but now, I fear that person will act first against Nanzhou. Yi Li raised her brows and looked sideways at Mo Shuyao. She saw agreement in Mo Shuyao's calm eyes. Is that person crazy? There were already endless disputes with the northern tribes in Xiling. They also started a war with Nanzhou. Weren't they afraid that the three countries would join forces and attack them? At that time, not to mention the fact that the Dechu state did not have any capable generals, even if Mo Lanyun and Mo Lufang were to come back, the Dechu state would be in trouble. Su Qingchen sighed and said, although our late emperor was still young when he inherited the throne, the regent did teach him diligently. But Our former emperor probably didn't have the time to teach them. It seems that the Empress Dowager taught them. When the previous emperor passed away, he was only 40 years old. Originally, he probably thought that he could live for another 20 to 30 years, so he didn't intend to nurture a successor so early to make things difficult for himself. Who knew that he would suddenly pass away? Although the Empress Dowager was known as a heroine of the generation, she was still just a woman in the harem. What she could really teach the emperor was scheming and scheming. Of course, it was also the Empress Dowager's methods that allowed Emo Jingqi to sit firmly on the throne after the previous emperor passed away. However, scheming and scheming could be used to seize power, but it could not be used to govern it. Although Emo Jingqi's goal was to become a sage, he knew in his heart that his ability to govern the country might not even be as good as his imperial father's. Therefore he valued and was more careful about his throne. As long as there was someone who could threaten his throne, he would mercilessly eliminate them. Yili frowned and said, "But Big Brother can't do anything even if he goes. What if he encounters danger?" Looking at the two worried men in front of her, Yili couldn't help but sigh. This world was like this. Some people were racking their brains to worry about the country and the people, while others were scheming and scheming in the dark. Some people were suffering in their sobriety, while others were singing and dancing in their ignorance. Su Qingchen smiled and said, "I have some friendship with the Crown Princess of Nanzhao. I'm just going to see her." Crown Princess? Yili sighed at Su Qingchen's wide circle of friends. Emo Shuyao raised his cup and looked at him, saying, "Many thanks." Su Qingchen raised his cup in return, calmly saying, "No need. This is father's idea. It's not for the sake of the Crown Princess." The Su family would not betray the Dechu state, but the Su family was not a savior. They had no power to turn the situation around. They could only do what they could do. After sending Su Qingchen off, Yili understood that Su Qingchen had specially come to say goodbye to them. Even Emo Shuyao had once praised eldest uncle for being one of the smartest people in the world. It was likely that when the news of Princess Lingyun's marriage failed, eldest uncle had already predicted the future of the Dechu state. Furthermore, before anyone, including the one in the palace, could react, he had sent eldest brother to Nanjiang. If something happens to the Dechu state in the future, the Su family will not be able to escape, right? Emo Shuyao looked at her with a gentle gaze, softly saying, "If you mean living in seclusion, then probably not. With the strength of the Su family's character, they would not be loyal to the emperor, but they would definitely die for the Dechu state." Does Li know why the Su family, as old officials of the previous dynasty, could still enjoy a good reputation in the Dechu state for hundreds of years without decline? Yili raised her eyebrows. Emo Shuyao said, "During the last years of the previous dynasty, the world was in chaos. Actually, the last emperor of the previous dynasty was not a tyrant, nor was he a fatuous ruler. He had almost no shortcomings, but he was not suitable to be the emperor. The ancestors of the Su family persisted in supporting the last emperor in times of crisis. Although they were a scholarly family, at least 7 members of the Su family died on the battlefield. In the end, ancestor Emo Lonyun led an army to besiege the capital. At that time, the head of the Su family personally went to the city to supervise the battle. The army fought for 7 days and 7 nights without success. The eldest son of Emperor Taizu was greedy for military merit and rashly advanced, dying in the chaos. Emperor Taizu was furious. He ordered the soldiers to kidnap the people near the capital and kill them outside the city every day. As long as the last emperor did not surrender, he would kill 5,000 people every day. Moreover, the day the city was broken, the whole city would be slaughtered. The next day, the head of the Su family personally killed the last emperor and opened the city to surrender. The only condition was that the people near the capital and the people near it were not to be harmed. On the day the Dechu army entered the city, the head of the Su family left a letter to his ancestors, then committed suicide. On the same day, Madame Su led the 73 members of the Su family to commit suicide. Only the youngest son of the Su family, who was 13 years old at that time, was still far away in Yunzhou. He was later the prime minister of Dechu state, Su Yanli. Yili was shocked by this secret that she had never heard of before. An unspeakable sadness choked her heart. She regretted and was annoyed that she had said such frivolous words to her uncle. Perhaps she did not understand the lofty character of a scholar, but as a soldier she understood and deeply understood the unyielding character and loyalty of a soldier. She did not dare to imagine the disappointment and sadness in her uncle's heart when she asked such a question. That was simply blasphemy and the greatest insult to the ancestors of the Su family and the 73 people who had committed suicide. Then, Yili lowered her eyebrows and asked. Emo Shuyao said, "You want to ask why it was different from what was recorded in the history books? There is no difference. Su Yanli did assist the Dechu state's emperor with all his heart. The third emperor of Dechu state was even personally taught by him. After the founding of the country, Emperor Taizu also bestowed titles and enviable titles to all the deceased members of the Su family." Looking at Yi Li's surprised appearance, Emo Shuyao calmly smiled and said, "Emperor Taizu killed too many people in his conquest of the world. He needed a benevolent reputation to stabilize the world." Chapter 127. What letter did the Su family's ancestor leave for Prince Ding? Yi Li asked with some hesitation. Of course, things were not as simple as Emo Shuyao said. The great emperor would not be at ease to use a prime minister whose entire family died for the previous dynasty. Emo Shuyao shook his head and smiled. This is not known. The ancestor seemed to have given the letter to the great emperor. That letter clearly saved Su Yanli's life. Afterwards, the news of the Su family dying for the people of the capital somehow spread. In addition, the Su family had been a famous family for hundreds of years, so their reputation was naturally unparalleled. Although there were many taboos in the history of the founding of the great emperor's dynasty, many things were gradually ingrained in the hearts of the people. Even if many things were gradually forgotten, many people still inherited some things from the words of their fathers, such as the respect for the Su family. Yi Li finally understood why the Su family did not marry into the imperial family, even if they really did not hate them. But it was still undeniable that the Su family had been exterminated because of the imperial family of the Dechu state. This could also explain why the imperial family did not give up the idea of suppressing the Su family, even if the Su family had always been indifferent to fame and wealth and did not like power. What Emo Lanyun did back then was probably not as simple as what Emo Shuyao had said. Yi Li rubbed her eyebrows with some distress and asked with some despair, "Will there definitely be a war?" "It's only a matter of time." Emo Shuyao sighed softly. The Dechu state has suppressed the other countries for too long. Almost everyone is impatiently waiting for the Dechu state to decline. And we seem to be used to thinking that we are the strongest. In fact, if it was not for the defeat 7 years ago, even he would think so. But when he dragged his broken body and left the battlefield with his brother's ashes and the Mahist army that had lost more than half of its elites, he realized how ridiculous his pride had been. Whether it was the Western Hill or the Northern tribes, they might not be as powerful as the Dechu state, but they might not be weaker than them. The Mahist army and Black Cloud cavalry that had once swept through the world had used their hundreds of thousands of corpses to prove this point. Li, it was the Ding Palace that destroyed the Dechu state. After a long time, Emo Shuyao finally said this in a low voice. If it wasn't for the fact that the Ding king's residence had always been too powerful, the Dechu state might have produced more famous generals and elite soldiers. If the Mahist army had not spent hundreds of years threatening the borders, the Dechu state might have been able to go further in this crisis. Yi Li was silent. She didn't know who was right and who was wrong. The Ding royal residence had loyally protected the Dechu state for hundreds of years. How many people in history could do that? Were they wrong? There was no doubt about it. Then was it the people they protected who were wrong? It wasn't that they didn't know anything. After a long time, Yi Li said in a low voice, "You are not wrong. It's the human heart that is wrong." Not every generation of emperors had the breadth of mind and courage to accept all rivers into the sea. Not every generation of emperors had the ability and magnanimity to make the 4 seas return to them. When the emperor no longer saw his officials as his right-hand man, but as his own threat. The excellence and achievements of his officials were more like a challenge and threat in the emperor's eyes. Hearing Yi Li's words, Emo Shuyao looked at Yi Li in a daze for a long time. Then he said with a faint smile, "I'm sorry, Li. Did I scare you by saying this?" Yi Li calmly glanced at him. Was she someone who was so easily scared? Emo Shuyao shook his head. "It's useless to think about this now. Li, why don't you guess how the Li Palace's matter will be resolved?" Yi Li shrugged in boredom and said, "How else can it be resolved? The emperor angrily killed Princess Shi Xia and demoted Li Wang? The emperor was persuaded by the old princes and imprisoned Princess Xixia and gave a small punishment to Prince Ding. Princess Xixia could marry Li Wang with a different identity. Yili felt that the Empress Dowager accepted Princess Xixia too quickly as a mother. Her eldest son's future concubine had a relationship with her second son. She only lightly scolded her and then started to plan to marry her. She didn't seem to consider the emperor's possible reaction. If it was a normal mother in this era, what they would do would be to kill the woman that could cause their son's brothers to fight. Which one does Li think is more likely? Emo Shuyao asked. Yili thought for a bit. The third one. She frowned. Then what happened today, was it someone else's scheme, or someone else's scheme? Looked like she needed to reevaluate Emo Jingli's brain or the brains of the people behind him. Li, stay away from Emo Jingli in the future, Emo Shuyao reminded. Yili nodded absent-mindedly, her mind still thinking about the previous question. What use is the Princess of Nanzhao to Emo Jingli? Emo Shuyao seemed to be a bit surprised. He glanced at Yili and said with a faint smile, she is the younger sister of the Crown Princess of Nanzhao. She is much more useful than Princess Lingyun. Yili's frown deepened. If Emo Jingli really has that kind of brain, would I be much worse than Yi Ying? Emo Shuyao seemed to smile even more happily. Believe me, if Emo Jingli really has a brain, he would rather marry Princess Lingyun than marry you. Yili's face darkened. Was she being despised to this extent? But perhaps their wishful thinking is wrong. Emo Jingqi seems to never play his cards according to the rules. Although this emperor was not as great as he thought himself to be, the occasional attack from the side was not something that ordinary people could withstand. Thus, by the time they returned to the manor, news had already spread from the palace. Princess Xixia had died of illness. Of course, this news would only spread after a few days. After all, even if the officials and nobles already knew what was going on, they would tacitly understand. But they still had to think of a way to deceive the common people. Today something had happened at the Li Manor and Princess Xixia had died on the same day. As long as one was not an idiot, they would be able to connect the two events and imagine what happened. As for the Li King's marriage and Princess Lingyun, since there was no indication from the palace, everyone was happy to treat it as if it had never happened. The emperor did not appoint a marriage and they naturally did not go to the Li Manor to send gifts. In any case, when the Li King married Princess Xixia again, they did not need to send gifts. They would just treat it as sending gifts in advance. In the palace, in the elegantly decorated and somewhat cold palace, Missouri Jingqi was recklessly venting his anger. The palace servants had long been scared out of their wits. Those who could not hide could only cower in a corner and tremble. All kinds of expensive antique paintings were smashed and torn to pieces on the ground. Tables, embroidered stools and shelves were all kicked to the side. Noble consort Lu coldly sat on a carved couch at the side, coldly looking at the crazy man in front of her. A 7 or 8-year-old little girl in luxurious clothes was held in her arms with frightened watery eyes. She seemed to be scared stiff and did not even dare to cry out loud. Noble consort Lu raised a hand to cover the girl's eyes, looking at the crazy man in the hall. Your Majesty, have you caused enough trouble? Emo Jingqi was startled. He slowly stopped and turned back to look at noble consort Lu's cold face. A trace of hostility flashed through his hazy eyes. Chapter 128. Come, take the princess away, noble consort Lu ordered. The servants kneeling in the corner hurriedly got up as if they had been granted amnesty. They took the frightened girl from noble consort Lu's hands and walked out, trembling. My dear consort, don't you want to say something? Emo Jingqi's voice was not as loud as it usually was in court. Instead, it was full of coldness and hatred. Noble consort Lu looked up at him. What does your Majesty want me to say? You're laughing at me in your heart, aren't you? Emo Jingqi pinched noble consort Lu's delicate chin and whispered in her ear. His cold breath was like a poisonous snake spitting out its tongue. I know you're the same as them. You look down on me more than them, right? You're happy to see everyone against me, aren't you? Whatever your Majesty says, noble consort Lu said lightly. But Emo Jingqi waved his hand and slapped noble consort Lu's jade-like face. Immediately, several red marks appeared. Noble consort Lu raised her head and looked at him calmly. Emo Jingqi was stunned. Shangri. Looking at the red marks on noble consort Lu's face, Emo Jingqi pitifully reached out to touch it. Shang'e, it's my fault. I shouldn't have hit you. Does it hurt? Why didn't you listen? Why did you always go against me? Why did you always care about this and that? Why did you threaten me? I hate being threatened. The more he spoke, the more agitated Emo Jingqi became. Soon he forgot his pity and grabbed noble consort Lu's shoulders with both hands, shaking and roaring. Your Majesty! Your Majesty! You've wronged noble consort Lu. A little maid suddenly ran out from the side hall and anxiously shouted at Emo Jingqi, Your Majesty, please let go of noble consort Lu. It really has nothing to do with noble consort Lu. Seeing that Emo Jingqi ignored her, the little maid looked around and found an antique vase that had not been smashed. Gritting her teeth, she walked over and picked up the vase, wanting to throw it at Emo Jingqi's back. Noble consort Lu's expression changed. She quickly pulled off a beaded flower from her hair and threw it at the little maid. With a crack, the vase fell to the ground and made a crisp sound. The originally crazy Emo Jingqi suddenly froze as though he had been startled awake. The little palace maid was so scared that her face turned pale, and she knelt on the ground with a plop. When she picked up the vase, her mind was blank and she didn't have time to think. Now that he had sobered up, he remembered what would have happened if he had really smashed it down. Emo Jingqi had obviously calmed down. He glanced at the little palace maid not far behind him, slowly letting go of noble consort Lu and standing up. As soon as he got up, noble consort Lu sat up again. She was still solemn and indifferent. If it weren't for the red mark on her face, people would think that nothing had happened. Shang'e, take a rest first. I'll ask someone to change your things later. Emo Jingqi only glanced at noble consort Lu, then quickly turned around and kicked away the little palace maid kneeling in front of him. He quickly turned around and left. Noble consort Lu stared at the figure that flew away. A trace of resentment and mockery flashed through her cold eyes. Nyong. The messy palace hall was silent. After a long time, the young palace maid kneeling on the ground carefully called out. Noble consort Lu's face had returned to its usual calmness as though nothing had happened. She said indifferently, Get up. What happened in the Li Palace today? Emo Jingqi wouldn't go crazy for no reason. Today was the day of King Li's marriage. There was nothing important. Although Prince Ding's marriage had made him a little anxious recently, he wouldn't suddenly explode. So something unexpected must have happened today. The little palace maid thanked her and got up. She walked to noble consort Lu's side and whispered, The Empress Dowager went to the Li Palace in a hurry, and then the Emperor summoned King Li, Princess Consort Li and Consort Xian Zhao to the palace. After King Li left, the Emperor immediately came to see Nyong. I didn't have time to report this. Noble consort Lu frowned. Summoned King Li to the palace? What about King Li's wedding? The little palace maid said, This is what I wanted to report to Nyong. The wedding has been cancelled. It said that Crown Prince Genom of Gojoseon of Xiling took the Princess of Xiling and left in a rage. It seems that something happened in the Li Palace, where the womenfolk are resting. Noble consort Lu frowned and waved her hand. Send a letter back and ask mother to come to the palace as soon as possible. Even if she was favored, she was always slow to get news from outside the palace. Yes, Nyong. Nyong, the emperor. Noble consort Lu curved her lips and smiled coldly. It's nothing. He was probably bullied by the Empress Dowager. We'll find a way to help him vent his anger. The little palace maid pursed her lips and smiled. Nyong knows the emperor best. But the old master sent a message to Nyong, asking Nyong to be careful of the Empress Dowager. After all, the Empress Dowager was a woman who fought her way out of the noble concubines of the late emperor. Not only did she give birth to 2 sons, but she also defeated those women and princes and helped her son become the emperor. The Empress Dowager was definitely not a woman who could be easily dealt with. Noble consort Lu said lightly, I know. The Empress Dowager is indeed powerful, but I'm not weak either. The Empress Dowager was indeed smart and powerful. But her biggest mistake was that she never understood what her son was thinking. Did she really think that Emo Jingqi was the only one who couldn't stand her desire to control everything? As long as a man had ambition, he wouldn't be able to stand it. It was just that some people didn't want to while others couldn't. In the Ding Palace, in the secret training ground in the depths of the Ding Palace, Yi Li's face darkened as she stared at Qing Wan and Ajin, who were using qigong to fly around in front of her. Qing Shuang, whose qigong was also not good, hid in a corner and laughed secretly. Even Emo Xiuyao, who was sitting by the side, couldn't help but smile. Yili really didn't understand. With her body's coordination, balance and other qualities, and according to Emo Xiuyao, she had a good physique for practicing martial arts. Why couldn't she learn qigong? She could use the plum blossom pile as if she was walking on flat ground. She had even mastered internal energy, which was a mysterious thing in the eyes of modern people. Why couldn't she fly? Luckily, Emo Xiuyao had found a set of qigong that was said to be suitable for women. Now, even Qing Shuang had learned it well, but she didn't feel anything. In fact, if it was a real battle, Yili didn't think there was much difference whether she knew qigong or not. Anyway, she didn't feel any pressure moving up and down a wall that was more than 10 feet high. She didn't think that people with good qigong could do better than her when it came to hiding. If it was a real close combat, qigong wouldn't be of much use. But wasn't it the dream of every martial artist in China to be able to move around freely? Since it really existed based on the principle of having more skills, why didn't she learn it? Li, what are you thinking about? Seeing Yi Li's rare irritation, Emo Xiuyao was very gentlemanly and didn't laugh at her. But from the light in his eyes, she knew that it wasn't that he didn't want to laugh. He just didn't want to laugh. Chapter 129. Yili looked resentfully at the three people scurrying around in the martial arts field and said, I probably don't have the talent to learn qigong. You don't need much talent to learn qigong. Only very good qigong required talent. That wasn't something that could be determined by qigong manuals. Just like Mr. Feng Yu Han Mingxi. His martial arts were only half as good as his inner strength. If not for his qigong, which was better than that of many top experts, he would have died many times over. This didn't make sense. Yili felt the veins on her forehead throbbing. This was beyond the limits of the human body. How could it not require talent and extremely high inner strength? Most importantly, it was impossible for humans to fly. What was Li thinking when you were using qigong? Emo Xiuyao asked patiently. Yili was a little depressed, but she still carefully explained her thoughts to Emo Xiuyao. Emo Xiuyao didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Li, if you keep thinking like this, you'll never learn qigong. You're using qigong while telling yourself that it's impossible for humans to fly? Yili obviously knew that this was almost like self-hypnosis. Normal people in this era didn't have this kind of problem. But Yili was different. Even though she was once the most outstanding warrior, even though people could fly in airplanes and even go into space. But at least the people of that era had a deep-rooted and indelible thought. That was, humans couldn't rely on their own bodies to fly. Therefore, Yili always subconsciously wanted to step on something to support herself. Once she couldn't find that thing and the distance between her body and the ground reached the limit of her consciousness, her body would subconsciously enter a state of self-protection and fall down. Ali, qigong doesn't allow you to fly in the air. You still need support, but it's much smaller than people who don't know qigong. Maybe a treetop or something small as long as you can control it well enough. Yili looked at him expressionlessly. Emo Xiuyao smiled helplessly. His right hand slapped the armrest of the wheelchair, and his entire body suddenly leaped up and headed towards the training field not far away. After a moment of surprise, Yili stared unblinkingly at his voice. She saw his hand quickly tap on a wooden stake on the training field, and then turn to another direction. Then it was on the treetops by the side of the training ground. The net that Yili had set up around the training ground finally fell back into the wheelchair. Did you see it clearly? Emo Xiuyao asked with a smile. He reached out and plucked a yellow flower from the treetops and handed it to her. This doesn't make sense. Yili gritted her teeth and glared at Emo Xiuyao. Was this a person who couldn't walk? Is that so? Actually, she was the one who couldn't walk, right? Emo Xiuyao looked at her in confusion. I know. Yili took the flower and played with it. Let me think about it. Emo Xiuyao smiled. I think Li is thinking too much. Or you can think about it. Imagine the peace you would feel if you fell from a 100-foot cliff. Without anyone to rely on, you wouldn't be able to turn anything. Naturally, you wouldn't be able to support yourself. Yili looked at him silently. She had really jumped from 100 feet, no, a few hundred feet. If that was the case, every paratrooper would become a qigong expert. I know, I'll try. Yi Li's try was to have Ajin bring her up to a 20-meter-tall wooden pole by the side of the training field and then jump down. The first time she suddenly fell from a height of about 10 meters. Yi Li was quite lucky as she was caught by a tree branch and fell into a sand pit by the side of the training field. The second time she flew across half of the training field and couldn't find a place to support herself. She fell from a height of about 5 meters. Her body protected itself well, so she only got a few scratches. The third time she lost control and crashed into a wooden pole on the training field. Yi Li was in so much pain that she didn't recover for a long time. The fourth time. The fifth time. Mo Shuyao sat by the side of the training field quietly watching that slender figure jump down, fly up and fall down again. Then she would climb up to check if there were any problems, jump again and fall again. Mo Shuyao didn't stop her. He watched as she failed again and again, then tried again and again. For the first time, an intense and unfamiliar emotion appeared in his calm eyes. In his deep eyes, there was only that slender figure that kept falling and standing up. Mo Shuyao, you're actually abusing a woman? Feng Jiao's voice suddenly rang out in the quiet training field. The shadow guards who were silently guarding in the dark twitched their lips and almost fell from their hiding places. Feng Jiao walked over while fanning himself. He looked at Yi Li in the training field, then looked at Mo Shuyao who was sitting silently by the side. He shook his head and sighed, "Ah Yao, that's your wife, not your enemy. I didn't think that after these few years, you'd become even more uncaring towards women." Mo Shuyao raised his head and glanced at him without saying anything. Seeing Yi Li fall to the ground again and again, he wasn't in a good mood. After being snubbed, Feng Jiao rubbed his nose and silently stood to the side. After watching for a while, he asked in confusion, "What is sister-in-law doing?" "Qinggong," Mo Shuyao said. Feng Jiao's expression twisted. His chin was almost poked by the fan. "Qinggong? Isn't she afraid of falling to her death?" These people had all learned martial arts since elementary school. Feng Jiao was born in the wild and had never been taught by a proper master. But he had never seen this kind of training method. Were women more desperate than men these days? As soon as he said this, he felt a cold glare on his body. Feng Jiao looked at the unhappy Mo Shuyao and smiled apologetically. He moved to the side to watch Yi Li practice. Yi Li had lost count of how many times she had fallen. When she was finally able to land on the ground, she felt as if she had been beaten up from head to toe. Her entire body was in pain. But inside she gave a big sigh of relief. She felt that she had never been so happy and satisfied since she had come to this world. Clap, clap, clap. Outside the field, Feng Jiao clapped his hands and raised an eyebrow at Yi Li in admiration. Qing Wan and Qing Shuang immediately gathered around. Qing Shuang's bright eyes were already red and swollen. She didn't care that there were people present as she hugged Yi Li Xiaojie and started to cry. Yi Li looked at herself and laughed as she patted the little Yatu in her arms to have her stand properly. Then she walked in front of Mo Shuyao. "Feng Gongzi, we meet again." Feng Jiao sighed and said, "Wang Fei really opened this one's eyes today." Yi Li said helplessly, "It's very easy for other people to learn, but it's very difficult for me. Since I want to learn, I naturally have to put in more effort." Mo Shuyao smiled faintly and said, "Li, let's stop here today. You can go back to freshen up and rest. Then you can find a doctor to take a look. Feng San and I will be in the study." Yi Li nodded and smiled, "It's nothing serious. It's just that it hurts a little. I'll go back first. Feng Gongzi, goodbye." Looking at Yi Li's back as she left with Qing Wan and Qing Shuang, Feng Jiao turned around and asked, "Ah Yao, what are you doing? The Shadow Guard and the Black Cloud Cavalry can't even protect the mistress of the Ding King's estate and make her learn self-defense skills?" Chapter 130. Young Master Feng. It was Wang Fei who wanted to learn. The prince taught her, Ajin said. He had never seen anyone more stubborn and persistent than Princess Consort. If the prince did not allow him to teach Wang Fei Qinggong, he really felt that Wang Fei would break her neck because she was secretly practicing. It's better to have the ability to protect yourself than to have someone else protect you, Mo Shuyao said calmly. There was no flawless protection in the world. Even the shadow guard of the Ding Wang Fu could not completely eliminate danger. More ability meant more safety in the future. Feng Jiao shook his head and sighed. To have this kind of perseverance and courage, not many men can compare. I really find it strange. How did the Yi family raise such a daughter? Even the Su family. Even the Su family could not raise such a woman. The women of the Su family could be overflowing with talent and they could be extremely intelligent. But he had never seen someone like Yi Li. Mo Xiuyao turned the wheelchair in the direction of the study. I didn't ask you to discuss Li. Feng Xiao stilled and smiled as he watched the person leave. A Yao wouldn't be jealous, right? Mo Xiuyao's study had been moved to the newly married courtyard. This courtyard that had been specially prepared for Prince Ding and Wang Fei was the largest courtyard in the entire Ding Wang Fei. There was even an independent library inside. After Mo Xiuyao moved in, the two quickly reorganized the room. The second floor of the two-story independent library was where the books were stored. The first floor was divided into two. One side was Yi Li's study and the other side was Mo Xiuyao's study. Therefore, when the two of them stepped into the study and saw Yi Li sitting behind the desk with a book in her hand, Mo Xiuyao wasn't surprised. He just asked, "Why didn't Ali rest for a while?" Yi Li raised the book in her hand and said, "It's not good to lie down and rest after practicing martial arts. I'll read for a while. Do you need to leave?" Mo Xiuyao shook his head. "Since you're not tired, then come and listen." Feng Xiao looked at the furnishings of the study. Hearing Mo Xiuyao's words, he raised an eyebrow in surprise but did not express any opinion. Yi Li thought and then walked over with the book in her hand. Feng Xiao looked curiously. "Princess, are you reading a book?" Yi Li was holding a book called The Art of War. Yi Li looked at the book in her hand and said, "I have nothing to do, reading to relieve my boredom." Reading military books to relieve boredom, such a special hobby. Feng Xiao thought to himself, but his expression was one of interest. "How do you feel?" "Not bad," Yi Li answered. Feng Xiao was not sure what Yi Li meant by not bad. He quickly looked at Mo Xiuyao. Mo Xiuyao was not moved. He asked with a smile, "What does Li Li think is not bad?" Yi Li hesitated slightly before saying, "The strategy is not bad, but the tactics." Maybe it was the difference between modern warfare and ancient warfare. Yi Li felt that many of the tactics written in this book were not reasonable, and could even be said to be whimsical. Of course, it was not that tactics could not be whimsical. In reality, the best commanders often had wild imaginations. But what was written in this book? In reality, Yi Li felt that it was more appropriate to call it a novel. This author definitely had never been on the battlefield, Yi Li thought to herself. Strategy? Tactics? Feng Xiao raised an eyebrow. Yi Li felt a bit vexed, but her expression was very calm as she looked at Mo Xiuyao and said, "Strategy refers to the overall plan and strategy of the war." Mo Xiuyao glanced at Feng Xiao and said calmly, "Tactics refers to the specific methods used to achieve the goal of the war, the deployment of troops and the strategy to defeat the enemy. Do you understand?" Feng Xiao looked at the calm couple in front of him in dismay. Were they looking down on his lack of knowledge? "What does Li Li think of tactics?" Mo Xiuyao ignored Feng Xiao's expression and asked Yi Li. Yi Li shrugged. "Compared to the Taizu Armament Code, I feel that this is more like a legendary novel." You've even read the Taizu Armament Code?" Feng Xiao screamed. Yi Li looked at him strangely and said, "My uncle and grandfather both have the Taizu Armament Code. What's so strange about reading it? My uncle taught me." She wasn't lying. Her uncle had indeed taught her the art of war. But it hadn't even been a month, so the Taizu Armament Code definitely hadn't been finished. This sentence also explained why she knew so much about the military. The Taizu Armament Code was indeed one of the best military books she had ever seen in this world. Feng Xiao silently thought to himself, "How did you grow up in the Yi family and the Su family? If you were born in the Murong family with the way General Murong taught his daughter, perhaps there would be a female general in our dynasty." The Taizu Armament Code wasn't just a book. The book had a total of 29 volumes, recording the battles of 17 famous generals in the early years of Taizu's founding. There were also commentaries written by the Dingwa Prince Mo Lanyun. It could be said that it was one of the must-read books for the generals of the Dechu state. There are many military books in the study in the front yard. If Yi Li likes them, you can go there to get them. Mo Xiuyao said. This yard wasn't a place to deal with matters, so the books in the study were mostly poetry or miscellaneous books. There were also a few military books, but they weren't of the highest quality. Hearing this, Yi Li's eyes lit up. There were many books in the study, but other than the poems and biographies that she wasn't interested in, The only books left were history, geography, and travel books. She wasn't interested in the matters of this dynasty or the secret history of this dynasty, so she had already browsed through the history books before she got married. So she could only read things like geography and travel books. But this kind of scenery that she couldn't see and touch made her depressed. This couple, this grandfather has to give it to you. Feng Jiao's heart twitched as he rolled his eyes. After returning to the main topic, Feng Jiao looked much more serious and pleasing to the eye. He looked apologetically at Imo Shuyao and said, Yao, I'm very sorry. I seem to have neglected many things these years. Imo Shuyao looked up at him. What? Is there news from the Li Palace? Feng Jiao nodded and said, Princess Lingyun thought she was smart enough to scheme against Imo Jingli. I'm afraid that she doesn't know that she was the one being schemed against. How so? Supposedly, the Li Palace has already found out that the incense in Princess Xixia's room was placed by Princess Lingyun. Princess Xixia's room was also placed by Princess Lingyun's people. But the servant girl that Wang Fei said was the first to charge into Princess Xixia's room that day was not one of Princess Lingyun's people, nor was she one of Princess Xixia's people. It was a servant girl that Xian Zhao Taifei had brought out of the palace, Feng Jiao said with a slightly serious expression. Yi Li asked with a frown, that servant girl? Feng Jiao said, that servant girl was secretly killed that afternoon. I sent people to keep an eye on the Li Palace and Zhaoyang Princess's palace. When Princess Xixia was taken back, there was no servant girl with her. It wasn't until midnight that someone took a servant girl's corpse out of the back door and threw it into an unmarked grave outside the city. But that servant girl's face was disfigured before she died and she didn't have anything to prove her identity.